Thank you. Let's get started, everybody. Good morning. On the meeting this order. A couple of housekeeping items real quickly before we jump into a real heavy schedule. And one that I think we all look forward to. It should be a great day. I want to thank all of you for holding this committee up in my absence last month. So, and really appreciated that. So thank you, Madam Co-Chairman, for shepherding everything. And in my absence, we kind of come to today with a great spring going on out there. And I wanted to just tip my hat to Wendy and her family and to the auditor, who both had members of their family in the state track meet over the weekend up in my neck of the woods. How fun was that? Congratulations. You know, thanks performance. She had a great weekend. Qualified for state. That was awesome. So congratulations to you guys. Welcome, Representative. Good to see you. Representative Nicholas, and hopefully the treasurer will be along in a little bit here, but Madam Co-Chairman, any thoughts to start the day with?
No, I don't think so. I think today is a crucible day. That's what I hear from more or less.
Well, anyway, good to see everybody. It's good to be out of town for a little bit and work on something that's kind of near and dear, I think. So we're going to start this morning with Mr. Renier, Mr. Cornish, Mr. Hodgson. Gentlemen, thanks for all your work. We look forward to your thoughts this morning, and together maybe we can sort of navigate our way to a good plan to execute some of the things that you recommended. So please take it away.
Lindy, do you want to start with anything? Budget or?
And Mr. Chairman, I need to give a quick update on where you ended up with appropriations after this session.
Absolutely.
So there was an original $1 million appropriation to the state construction department in 2022. And that's the money that the design fees have been paid out of to date. And that money was carried forward still in state construction department's budget. Excuse me. So that money is still intact. In addition, 2.3 million was appropriated this session into the Capitol Square preservation account. And of those funds, it says they are appropriated without specific line item detail to acoustics, maquettes, which are the miniatures of the Four Sisters, and to security bollards on Capitol Square. And so we still need to make some decisions and need to make some decisions about who gets to make those decisions about how much of that goes for what. But the amount of money that you should have available for acoustics itself from that would be a minimum of about $1 million, possibly more, but just to be conservative. You also had last session $1.5 million appropriated. And we'll make sure we have these totals as Trainer goes through all of their presentation. They've got these totals as well. That 1.5 million is for finishing the broadcast studio, of which Trainer will be doing the design on that, and Avant will be helping with all the specifics that you need for acoustics in that space. And then there's some other shelled space fill outs, as well as that art gallery area outside of this room. So a portion of that money will go to the broadcast studio. So overall, you are sitting pretty well with those appropriations, as well as, and I might turn this over to Brandon, major maintenance money is available for any mechanical remedies that Trainer has identified. I don't know, Brandon, if you want to say anything about major maintenance and the types of.
So Brandon, before we get to that, and Wendy, thank you for that. And I want to thank the committee, every single one of you, the governor's office as well. It really took every one of us, I think, doing the work that we did that made the presentation of that budget item pretty darn easy. And of course, Representative Nicholas, Representative Sherwood and others helped along the way, but I'm glad that we're in a position where we can consider some really great things this morning. Brandon, that major maintenance piece, can you kind of outline what that means and what that encompasses?
So along with the major maintenance, with the mechanical systems and the condition that they're in, it should be covered by major maintenance and not this project. So we're looking at that piece right now and removing that from not totally the scope, but we're removing it from the budget line and moving it. We'll proceed with design of repairing those mechanical systems and deal with that from that funding moving forward. So that should lessen the load on the result of what this committee's has to do.
So specifically, we talked about those, the canisters that in the hallways that contain the systems that you referenced. But that also includes maybe some of the noise that we get in 110, 113.
Absolutely. So some of that mechanical noise, you got those squirrel cans in there that are spinning around at variable rates and making all kinds of noise and making it difficult. So we're working with our team and we'll solve that through the major maintenance. So that's going to move forward regardless of where we go with the project, the mechanical side of things and major maintenance.
Appreciate that. Any questions, folks, for Wendy or Brennan? Thank you for setting the stage, Wendy. Appreciate that. Gentlemen, I think we're ready.
And Mr. Chairman, I'd say one more thing, so that between those fund sources, you probably are between design fees and if you were to do the whole scope, the funding probably isn't the issue that it was going into this session. So I guess to lead into Trainer's report, when they first ordered kind of their list of recommendations, it was based on the monies available at the time, not the monies available now. So the report you received was prior to knowing those total funds.
Thank you.
Now, okay, all right. Thank you. Appreciate it, Wendy. Thank you. Take it away, gentlemen.
Okay, we will. Again, I want to kind of introduce the team members we have here. My name is Todd Renier, Associate Principal for Trainer HL. And to my right is Zach Cornish, who will be our project architect on this project. We brought two gentlemen from Henderson Engineers, Helen Horner and Jeff Hudgerson. And John, obviously, with the bond. So they're the ones that have helped us prepare all these reports and helped us work through the cost estimating process too. So if you have any specific questions, feel free to interrupt us at any time. So we want to start out kind of going back and recapping some of the issues that we talked about from the very beginning, almost a reminder. And we're going to try to go through these quickly to get to the workshop portion. But our goals, first of all, do no harm to the building, protect everything you've done to date. Balance the need to improve acoustics without sacrificing historic fabric, such as the historic Supreme Court. Acoustical remedies employed should conform to historic building standards. We are following the Secretary of Interior standard. And spaces should be prioritized based on their type and frequency. So anywhere you need to publicly conduct business, we feel those should be priorities. That would be such as the JAC and the chambers versus 110 and 113. And finally, scope of work should be a balanced approach. So as we've talked about in the past, quality, budget, scope, and schedule. Another element kind of as part of the beginning, as part of that project charter, again, was the presentation of trying to balance everything. So at the end, we've already done the footwork and we're working within the confines of our design. So we talk about budget, scope, and quality once again, and then understanding the project, knowing it's a historic building, knowing there may be a potential for phasing, conversations with you all, the stakeholders, defining a scope of work and creating a schedule. The AE team that you see before you has made recommendations in the previous reports, and hopefully today we can nail those down. the decision-making process, which is where we feel we're at now with the subcommittee evaluation and this workshop. So hopefully after today, we can proceed with the next phase. You all received yesterday, I believe, the report summary, and to reiterate, that was a very comprehensive, highly detailed report. And it was intended to try to recap the last year's worth of research, the technical expertise of the engineers, and to try to make a prediction on movement towards a certain direction. The report addresses every space. So we know that that's not necessarily the case, but again, we were told to address every case. So anyway, so it is there for your reading pleasure. It's long and detailed, so a little different approach than our previous presentations. Also want to go back and kind of reiterate the priorities. And again, this was from the very beginning, and this was based on needs. And so the priorities, the high priority and low priority you see on the list, we broke up into legislative, executive, and common spaces. So again, these were all needs. And at this point, we believe that we can start over and kind of void this. Today, we want to talk more about how it applies to your budgets, as Wendy mentioned. Needs is one thing, but obviously we understand there's a constraint with budgets. So, but prior to that, I want to just reiterate once again the benchmarking that everybody kind of talked about and agreed to, and that is the standard of care. That's your quality. And so we used other capitals in the United States, Kansas, California, Colorado, and Idaho to kind of set that benchmark. What are we trying to do? And to also use their projects as examples and to learn from what they've experienced and proceed. Zach's going to take us into the fun part, the workshop. So.
Yep. So what we saw in a couple of those benchmarking ones are the acoustic improvements that those other state capitals have undergone. So here we break it apart into three main categories. So that's going to be the acoustic treatment. And when we say that, we're talking about treatment options on the wall, ceiling, or floor. The acoustic improvements may also be mechanical modifications, which is going to be repairs to HVAC systems, including ductwork and fan coil units, as well as anything incidental to the architectural treatment. So if we do add a treatment option to a wall or ceiling, there may be incidental repairs necessary to accommodate the new treatment. And then we also have the sound reinforcement, which is going to be a lot of what Avant has been working with you all on, and that's that sound system improvement piece, as well as some speakers, which we're going to be showing here today as added to spaces. So one thing to get out up front is the goal of this workshop is, again, to define the scope of work moving forward. So here we've outlined three key points to keep in mind as we work through this. The first is we are able to utilize different pots of money to address different scopes of work, simplifying the number of rooms addressed in this workshop. So we're going to go into that in more detail on some of the following slides, but Wendy already addressed that major maintenance is a pot of money that we are able to remove some of the rooms that we had included in the report as a separate budget item. And the second key piece here is the design team's recommendations have included considerations of acoustic performance, invasiveness, and impact. While ceiling treatment may require more invasive installation, it will have less impact in the long term. So again, the ceiling is going to have the greatest impact on the acoustics. It'll also have the greatest impact on installation, of course, because ceiling has everything from lights to various mechanical systems and electrical systems that would have to be they'd be incidental to what we installed. So that would take work to then install that, but over the long term, it would pay off in the benefit that it has to the room. And a third thing to note is if it's imperative that a reduced scope be considered, we advise that completing fewer rooms per our recommendations rather than beginning to implement partial solutions in many rooms be done. Rooms in which public business are conducted should be prioritized. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in the following slides as well. So as we've mentioned, we have the different budgets that we are calling the pots of money we can pull from. So our total estimated cost was about $3 million. And now that is including everything we've looked at to date. So that is including major maintenance, broadcast, and all the acoustic improvement items. But with the major maintenance, we have our different solutions there that can be pulled from that pot of money. Broadcast, of course, has its own. And then in all of these, our estimate excludes anything that is here. So again, it's a cost estimate. It's looking out to the future, trying to do the best that our cost estimator could do to predict what that cost may look like. And in the report, he had included a broken down, detailed report on what actually went into that cost estimate, which you can see. So the major maintenance mechanical items, here are the list of rooms we were able to pull out of the report and begin to include that in a separate pot of money moving forward. So we estimated this about 800,000 of that 3 million can be moved to the major maintenance fund source. Now, something important to note here is that all these cost estimates are adding in a 25% premium, just with the assumption that this may not happen all at once, but could be incrementally pieced together. So if the state decided not to pursue the incremental steps, you may see a 25% deduction in that overall cost. Now, I don't know if Henderson, you guys have anything to touch on this identified replicable solution and the miscellaneous mechanical issues. But if there's any confusion on what that is, maybe an explanation of what might that entail.
Yeah, so the replicable solution, fun word to say, is basically treating those fan coil units that you see in a lot of the offices, the halls. And when I say fan coil units, I mean the wood paneled cooling and heating units that tend to sit below the windows and in some of the corridors. Basically, that's a solution that we've come up in conjunction with LeBlanc's recommendations to modify those as a way to reduce the what we call breakout noise from those motors in there that's getting into the office and causing this disruptive sound that you're all hearing. So that is something that can be applied, throughout all those spaces. So we don't necessarily have an individual solution. It's replicable.
Yep. And so a lot of that cost is going to be dealing with that historic wood surround. And it's not necessarily the easiest fan coil unit that's out of the box. It's including any repair and modification to that box itself to make it function properly.
You want to touch on miscellaneous mechanical?
Go ahead.
Also, that $755,000 total that you're seeing down there, that's just for the rooms you identified as part of this report. When Henderson started doing the work, I think part of the point is you could apply that to all rooms in the spaces, even ones, because those are just the ones we've received a lot of complaints about. It doesn't mean there aren't others, to your point, that are having the same issues.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. That's why we called it the replicable solution. So anything that we've done to these rooms can then be replicated moving forward as necessary.
How did you come up with the major maintenance dollars? I mean, you're just assuming that we have the dollars there and we're gonna use it for next year's.
Yeah, so the calculation here is just our estimate of what it would cost to solve these issues.
Funding was.
Have that broken down by unit by room, because I think what we want to do is test it and see in fact that it works before we do.
Yeah, and maybe a mock-up would be valuable in moving forward. In the report, it does break down each one of these items individually. The miscellaneous mechanical issues are, of course, the more expensive ones because they're not part of that replicable solution, which is just dealing with the fan coil unit. But yes, each one of these is broken apart in the report so that you can potentially take it one at a time.
And the miscellaneous mechanical issues are unique, right?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so they vary from anything from, the IT stuff is more driven by fans and things like that are specific to that room. We also have, other mechanical units that are vibrating and not necessarily isolated properly. So we presented solutions for those as well. That's why they're under the miscellaneous side, is that it's not something that can be done to all of them. It is specific recommendations for each one of those spaces to approve the acoustics. So that's a little bit different.
So just real quickly, gentlemen, Wendy, can you help me understand? Where's the dividing line? In other words, I've kind of looked at the report. How many other places have we not identified in this major maintenance piece?
And I think I turn it over to Brandon. I think that's something that we would need to do additional follow-up work, because when you first started this project, we just brought to you rooms that we have received a lot of complaints. It doesn't mean that and it's probably primarily individual offices that we're missing for the fan coil unit issue. And it might be just that people are like, well, this is just noisy, and haven't necessarily brought it up to the attention that some of these other rooms have gotten as part of this report.
It doesn't necessarily include everything that would be public, for example.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would include all public spaces. I think the fan coil unit, let Henderson speak to this. Typically, those would be in either small conference rooms or individual offices.
Yes, yeah, I think almost all of the non-public spaces are the miscellaneous ones where it's private office area, private group office areas or conference rooms, things like that. Pretty much all the rest of the facilities appeared to be served by those fan coil units that we could apply that replicable solution to. So if you were to get through all of them and then got some complaints later, you could take that same solution to those fan coil units and, theoretically solve the problem there as well.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, I think where this slide kind of helps today is, again, simplifying what rooms we're actually looking at with this subcommittee's budget, and the $3.3 million that's for acoustic improvement, as well as other things. So here we can just set aside these rooms for another budget that then we can focus on the acoustic improvement specific rooms. So the next pot of money is that broadcast studio budget. And so here, this is another separate appropriation. Something to note on here is that a lot of the design work is still yet to be done. So we've taken a very basic approach to this space so far without including any type of equipment that's special to the broadcasting studio. So our estimate that is included in that comprehensive report, it does give an item towards it. It's about 400,000 so far, but our estimated cost that we're going to present here today is just going to be determined pending the scope moving forward. But as we understand, that is a sure goal of the state, that the broadcast studio is going to be included, going to be designed, and to be constructed. So as we move forward with that design process, we'll be able to present a more conclusive cost estimate. Which brings us to the acoustic improvement. The goal of this workshop here today is to go through these rooms. So in talking about the acoustic improvement, one thing we need to consider is the net impact of our treatment options. So our treatment options, they're the things like the wall, ceiling, drapery that we've talked about and shown in our benchmarking. But here on the left is a graph that I want to present just to reiterate that the net impact from some of these things, the drapery, area rugs, that's going to be pretty minor in the total acoustics of a room. When we're talking about wall and ceiling, that's where we're going to get the majority of the surface area of absorption that's going to be able to reduce the reverberation in the room. So when we're looking at a specific room, potentially looking at incrementally stepping towards an acoustically sound room, doing something as small as drapery and rugs is not going to make as much of a difference. It's not going to have as much of an impact as, say, the wall or ceilings. And in many of our rooms we're going to talk about today, we're going to recommend doing just the ceiling. There are a few rooms where we do recommend each one of these be undertaken at once. But primarily, as I said earlier, our recommendation is going to be a complete system as opposed to a partial system in many rooms. So with that, the goal is to get as close to the ideal acoustics as practical. And we'll have some slides in the future that Avant has put together. And if you remember in reports past, that they had put together graphs showing the recommended target acoustics and then the different lines of different options that we had examined in the past moving forward to conclude with our now final recommendation on how to achieve the ideal acoustics, which may not be perfect. And I think that's something important to consider too, and we'll see in future slides. It may not be perfect, but it's gonna be that balance that Todd had mentioned earlier, where we're balancing quality, scope, and budget. So these rooms here on the left are the ones we're about to get into. And we're looking at an estimated cost of 1.6 million total for every one of these rooms, including all of our recommendations. And again, I'll reiterate that 25% premium is added. So if it's all undertaken at once, it's more like 1.3 million. So to begin, we'll look at the Joint Appropriations Committee room. And in this room, we have presented wall treatment, furniture mounted drapery, speakers, and then all the other incidental engineering building system modifications. So that room comes in at a cost of about $57,000. And this is including all of our recommended acoustic treatments. So if this is all undertaken, again, that's what the rendering will look like, which we can hop back to if you would like. But this is one of the graphs, and I think here we can spend a little bit of time on it, re-examining what exactly we're looking at and how we got to our conclusion on our recommendations. So as you can see, the red line at the top, that's the existing measurement. So you have a lot of reverberation at your 500 hertz frequency, and this may be getting into a lot of detail, and John can help reiterate a lot of this too. But our recommended is that green line at the bottom. And those two lines in the middle are these different treatment options that we've proposed. Now, moving forward with our recommendation, we had concluded that the wall and drapery treatment, while they don't get us to the target, they get us reasonably close. And each item of that, the wall and the drapery, they work together to provide the best solution. John, I don't know if there's any more you want to touch on there.
Maybe if there's any questions we can help answer.
So does that include the, any roofing tiles? Does it?
So here, because of the ceiling in this room, it's highly decorative, we opted to not touch it at all. The only thing added to the ceiling are those speakers to give to reinforce that sound system.
Yeah, so this is a good example of where compromise has to be made between historical significance, other elements in the room. And so coming up with a solution that we think will work well. It may not get us to that ideal, but it's going to be a good compromise in terms of performance and aesthetics and architecture.
And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but the 12 speakers we show on this RCP, the little black dots, if you can see them well, those speakers will have grills that can be painted to match the decorative paint.
Yeah,
Right.
that's correct. Yeah, and the speaker solution here, there's a couple places where we've talked about some speaker modifications. Those are places that we've identified in our previous reports as places where we can enhance the the loudspeaker distribution system over what it is today. We've already gone back through and tried to reconfigure the systems as best we can. But now we're kind of at the limits of the hardware that are there. And in this room in particular, switching our loudspeaker distribution system from the little desk mounted speakers to something that's overhead will give us a better, more intelligible and uniform experience for that room.
How much is the sound system?
That number would be in that report.
Yeah.
It's probably a small portion of this.
Yeah, for a detailed analysis.
What was that question?
How much was just the sound system cost?
Yeah, I think in the cost estimate on the details page, some of the further back on that appendix, it breaks down, and I believe in this case, it calls it a special electrical system. That doesn't verbatim say speakers. If I remember correctly, don't quote me here, but it's around 10 to 15,000, I think, for all work involved, and that's the speakers, installation, and electrical part of that special electrical system.
And so then on the acoustical ceiling panels versus the carpet. Your other graph suggests the carpet's probably less than 2 or 3%.
Hmm.
The rest of the benefit is just from ceiling panels.
Hmm.
Is that fair?
In this room, we're actually just looking at wall treatment.
There was no ceiling here.
no
because of the
ceiling.
Decorative paint.
And the carpet in this room is already a high enough pile that any substitution of carpet is gonna be marginal at best.
So this is the ceiling, the wall panels.
Yes.
Show this.
Yeah, so the
Quarter
wall,
inch or half an inch or an inch.
it's an inch and a half is what we have been working with right now. And Todd actually has a sample here that is the actual product that we're presenting as using as a basis. This is the Star Silent system by Pyrock. So it's an acoustic plaster that has a underlayment that is gonna be the absorptive surface. So here, for instance, we have shown it with just a simple, probably a bull nose corner or a beveled edge, but it's gonna be the integral color of the wall, the underlying wall color. This is all stuff that we would be designing if this room were to move forward. So for instance, in this rendering, you can see we used a little bit of a kind of a pinstripe kind of motif that we borrowed from the decorative ceiling. That's one of the kind of beading reel decorative items on the ceiling that we can recreate to help blend the wall panels into the existing architecture.
So how, Zach, how's that attached to the wall? I mean,
Mhm.
I'm just curious, does it stick out away from the wall or is it adhere
Yeah,
directly to the wall?
so we've worked with the manufacturer on this on two different options, and both of these we believe will follow the Secretary of Interior standards that it can be removed in the future if needed. But we've looked at adhering and mechanical fasteners. Something to note on this, so what you see there is the panel that would then be mounted on about a 3/8 of an inch hat channel. That hat channel is what's gonna be mounted to the wall to then host that. Does that answer your question, Mr. Chairman?
So if you get up close and personal with it, there's gonna be a little bit of a gap between the panel and the wall itself.
Well, we'll try to fill that gap around the perimeter. So we'll either treat it with a return of the same product or a piece of wood trim. It all depends on, as we start going through the design, depending on the space and its architectural features, we'll propose different options of how to trim out the edges. But yes, if it was just stuck on the wall, you would see a 1/2 inch gap. You'd see the metal hat channels behind it. But we want to obviously fill that in and make it look as if it's a raised plaster panel. We want it to look like it fits.
So this might be for John, I've got a question. If we do all of this to the appropriations committee room, for example, what kind of time frame are we looking at to, let's just say, yeah, everything shipped in, everything's ready to go. How long do we have to take a room like that down to accomplish what you're recommending?
That's a pretty good question. Installing this stuff takes time, right? It is a plaster product, so they're gonna have to cover things and keep dust at a minimum and clean up. So I don't know, did you guys have an estimate for something like that?
No, but we could, if scope moved forward and you said, go ahead and go after this room, do as we recommend. We could get a contractor involved at a certain level to say, can you give us an idea of time frame? We turn this room over to you 100%. Are we talking a week? Are we talking 2 weeks? The work itself is pretty minimal. It's just the phasing of putting on the troweling on the finishes like you would with drywall. Then having the decorative painter come in and potentially a craftsman, a carpenter to trim it out. So that would be something we could easily do with Brandon and working through the contract. We could have somebody on board right away to help us create a schedule that would kind of give you an idea how long you would be shut down.
Realistically, it shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 weeks.
Oh, I
Yeah.
wouldn't think so. Yeah.
Order of magnitude, you're talking weeks, not months.
I have a real dumb question. The sound, the effect we're going for, I'm assuming is affected through this, meaning this doesn't show anywhere.
Correct.
This, okay.
And they do make different textures, and that was chosen because that replicates historic plaster the best. It's got a little bit of texture, and that'll also have integral paint with it, so it's actually gonna have a paint color, and it can actually be painted over itself. A lot of features with this product.
And since it's being used as wall treatment, it has the potential to get bumped into or knocked and dented. And so that's one of the criteria in looking at this that we prioritize, and that this product does not dent as much as any other acoustic plaster. If it does happen to break, it's integrally colored, so you're not gonna see a white chip if paint comes off. You're gonna see that integral color that's throughout that plaster layer. Just a little
The
bit.
other option is adhering just to the wall.
So with that space, John, you might touch on this too, that 3/8 of an inch hack channel, we're actually embedding more insulation in that cavity to increase the absorption. So,
The gap behind this product would be filled with like a mineral fiber insulation. Even if you were to adhere instead of mechanically fasten, there would still be probably wood furring strips to provide that sort of standoff depth so that it can be filled with the mineral fiber. The mineral fiber adds a lot of acoustical value. This product itself does absorb sound because of its kind of porous nature that you can see, but it's still not as good as something like a, fiberglass or mineral fiber insulation. So we're trying to get that little extra bit of depth to enhance the acoustics as much as possible.
We looked at thicker options, but the thicker it got, the bigger the profile, the more it sticks out, the more it looks like it's obviously stuck on the wall. This met the needs of a font study and gave us a thin profile.
So as I look at the picture, it looks like you're suggesting these panels on each of the open space walls. Not just 2 or 3, but all the way through
through the front and 2 flanking walls of the room. The back wall, of course, it has the mural on it, so we called that off limits and did not include that in our recommendation. But we were able to achieve, as we showed here, close to our recommended acoustic value for the room with the panels that we've shown here.
One of you alluded to seating, all of those bare chairs in there. Can you expound a little bit on that? And I seem to recall that we touched on that before, but.
Yeah, we did talk about that previously. If the seating were to be replaced, that could help as well. When we look at the absorption of a chair, if it's filled with a person, it's not really doing anything. But if it's not, padded seats or padded backs can help keep the room consistent.
Depends if that person's talking.
Yeah, it's true. So the chairs add more consistency to the acoustical performance of the room, not necessarily a lot of overall improvement. Because again, when the seats are filled, it's more about the absorption a person provides. So if it was, we would recommend, if you are interested in replacing some of the furniture, putting in padded chairs would be a benefit.
Well, I think the chairman of appropriations might want to comment on this, but I think they put hard chairs in there on purpose because they don't want you sticking around very long. Go ahead, gentlemen.
Thank you. So the next space we'll talk about are the public meeting rooms. This is W110 and 113.
Before we go on, Wendy, just in terms of type of paint, what the paint would look like and how we would design the trim. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, what would happen next, and I may turn this back over to Trainer, is if you'd like to pull the trigger, Trainer will actually start design and they'll come back to you with some historically appropriate options that then a decorative paint company would come in and paint on top of the actual acoustical plaster surface. And so what they show you in these images, these renderings, aren't necessarily what you'd get. That'd be up to this committee to work with you and to work with the historic cues in the room. That would also be true in any of the other places that you're considering this product, such as the chambers. So you can kind of go as much or as little as you'd want to make that its own architectural feature or to diminish it. There's different ways to look at the treatment of that.
So my question, does it make sense to go back to the original decorative folks who did the Capitol? Just have them put in the paneling and then have those experts come in and do the painting and make sure it corresponds exactly with the decorative work that's already been done.
I mean, we could work with Evergreen, worked with them many times on many projects. We could literally work with them and say, hey, here's some options. What would you recommend based on what you understand the color to be? Wendy did share Evergreen's entire color palette with us, so we have that. We know what the colors are. But we could work with them if you want us to actually look at options, scale, proportion. We've done that before with them, so.
And then on the speakers, of your graph of impact, how much of that is the speakers?
So on this graph of impact, including the room acoustic environment, reverberation time. The speakers don't have an impact on that metric. If we look at our sound system report, we talk about what's called speech transmission index, which is our measure of intelligibility of the sound system. So speakers are going to impact that value and increase that number above what it is today. We could look at that if you want to get into more detail on it. We've had our after action report for February that kind of goes through all that number for all the spaces. But the reverberation time directly impacts the intelligibility of the sound system. So when we're looking at acoustical treatments in the room and the number on this graph and what this metric is showing, the lower this number goes, the higher our intelligibility can grow. And also replacing the speakers will also raise that intelligibility number.
Again, it's that balance that we're after. So it's the balance of intelligibility as well as room acoustics.
Are they drop speakers? Or they are, mounted in the ceiling?
Looking at recessed.
It'll be flush mounted.
Mr. Chairman. As background for that, K2, who designed the AV systems in the building, actually originally specified ceiling speakers, but then with the vaulted ceiling, the architects thought, well, let's just do the desktop speakers. So it wasn't originally specified to have desktop speakers in that space.
I think we need each one of those broken out by cost so we can see before we make any type of decisions on it.
So the next place is again, the public meeting rooms. These ones, we are recommending only doing the ceiling treatment. So wall panels were presented as a potential option here, as well as window drapery. But this is one of the cases where ceiling is gonna get the most bang for your buck, if you will. So while it is the most invasive option, again, you're gonna have electrical, speakers, different modifications that will need to be made to the ceiling to accommodate the treatment. In the long run, this frees up wall space. It's out of sight, almost out of mind, and it will be detailed in a way that you would hardly know it's there. And many of the benchmarking, if you will, I'll go back to some of these examples. So for example, that Colorado Capitol image on the bottom left, that ceiling is an acoustic ceiling. And the historic Supreme Court in this building, that's an acoustic ceiling, but you would never know because it was detailed in a way that its transition into the flat plane of the plaster was done in a way that it looks like just a regular ceiling plane. And so that's primarily why we recommend doing a ceiling when the option's available, is because it becomes unnoticed in the long run. You'll have the impact on the acoustics, but not the visual impact you would if it were mounted on the wall. So here are the different options we looked at for that room and why we went with the ceiling treatment. So as you'll see, the green line again is the recommended value and the orange line is the ceiling treatment option. It doesn't perform as well as it could in the low frequencies, but that's just something that is, the payback is in the mid-range frequencies that we speak at. That's where intelligibility happens. So we prioritize that, didn't go with all the options, but because the ceiling treatment provided that acoustic environment, we recommend only installing acoustic ceiling treatment.
So
that
I,
was-
in those rooms, I thought there might be opportunity with those posts that run down through the middle of the rooms. We've got two of them.
Mhm.
They're kind of intruding on the space to begin with. It just felt like maybe there might be opportunity there, but you guys don't see any opportunity.
So, yeah, that may go back to this graph and that if we're looking at the ceiling alone, the ceiling alone and its square footage gets us to that recommended acoustic environment. If we're already in the ceiling, then it does its job in bringing the room where we want it to be. If we, looked at the columns alone, it doesn't have enough area on them to provide the absorption necessary. And then, that could be work in tandem with the rest of the walls surrounding the room to achieve that area of absorption. But being able to get that with only the ceiling, I think that's primarily why we're recommending it, is because it's, again, it's the least invasive or least impactful, I should say.
Yeah, in most of these situations, too, we kind of looked, in our previous reports and previous presentations, we've looked at wall treatments or ceiling treatments. There is an option to do wall treatments that might include the columns as a different solution. But as we've kind of worked through, what's the impact of that? We think that the best solution would be to focus on the ceilings, put it all there, it leaves the walls untouched so you can add more artwork or do whatever you need to later. And so it has the least visual impact as well. So we thought that was kind of important to proceed down that route. That's what we were recommending.
Another feature of the walls is in a public space, when you have standing room only, you have a major committee meeting and people are gathering in the back, they're leaning against the wall. This is more fragile than a painted plaster wall or a painted chipboard wall. So you're gonna have a lot more repair potential on this than you would. So we're trying to think through where we could apply it that would be least visible, as Zach mentioned, and have the big bang for the buck acoustically, and least amount of exposure.
So in these rooms, you would stop on the ceiling and not recommend the curtain work that we've talked about. Okay.
Correct, yeah. So we provided here the calculation to show that the ceiling treatment alone would suffice.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm curious on the materials you're using. How many manufacturers of similar products are out there? How many did you review and the cost differences and
We
quality?
reviewed 4 total to get to this product. All of them have their own nuances. So we're recommending this as our basis of design, if you will. But there are other options. They just didn't perform as well in the criteria that we used in examining this.
And this is the only company that'll guarantee wall surface within touch. And that was the big kicker for us, was because with, for instance, both chambers, we recommend putting it on the wall. We want a product that the manufacturer will stand behind for abuse level, patchability. And so when we started looking at this product, we started again going back to the Fellerts and the Boswell Ponds, and they're a little more soft. They have great values, but you could never put those on the wall. They would never stand by it. This is also the interesting thing about this is also part within like a chipboard installer. It's not that much of a specialty that a Boswell Pond or a Fellert would have. They still certify their installers, but as a product, it's more readily accessible to general contractors to apply. So.
And for the ceiling?
Same thing. We we actually compared, do we go with this on the walls and a Bosifon on the ceiling? But now you've got two separate contractors potentially, two different pricing, two different materials. You would have to change your staging, you'd have to change your product shipments. Whereas this would be the product everywhere, ceilings and walls. Again, we're trying to think through a way to save money, save time on site, because you wouldn't have to call in a different person, you'd have to be working over somebody else.
If I may, Representative Nicholas, I think this is another facet of the nuance that goes into our recommendation in doing it all at once. So we can mobilize contractors to do both wall and ceiling where those have been recommended instead of splitting it off and remobilizing contractors. Now, the house chamber and gallery is one of the spaces where we have a lot of different recommendations, and taking them all in is, again, the complete solution that we are recommending. So here you can see in these various graphics, we have the wall treatment, ceiling treatment, drapery, speakers, all the incidental engineering items, and then we have the railing modifications. This is all detailed, thoroughly detailed in that report. So there's a narrative there that describes each one of these options and why we went with that. So the wall treatment, ceiling treatment, those were getting the square footage, the area of absorption that we required for the recommended reverberation time. The speakers were to increase the sound intelligibility, and the railing modifications was some of the reflection coming off the existing glass railings that were non-historic but have been maintained, but replacing those with some brass railings similar to what was done in the historic Supreme Court and elsewhere in the Capitol building is what we're recommending to remove that reflection coming from the gallery space. So here's what rendering of that house chamber looks like that we've put together. So you'll see here on the lower level where the legislative body sits, you have the wall panels there. Here shown in a darker color, a contrasting color with the base wall paint, that green color. That color was again selected from evergreens, colors used on the walls, and ties in some of the surrounding architecture to that panel. So it helps it blend in a little bit more. Now, this is again something to note here. All this is going to be set in design. None of this is set in stone right now. We'll work with you to specify paint colors, to specify the details surrounding the wall panels. For instance, the details surrounding the wall panels here, we're showing as being painted to match the surrounding base color, but it's going to be a wood profile. So that was inspired by one of our historic research that actually was brought to us, showing that shortly after the Capitol building opened, it became evident that acoustical treatment was needed. And within a year after the chamber was commissioned, the sound intelligibility, the reverberation was so bad that they had to bring in contractors to install wall panels similar to what we have shown here. And actually in that architectural report you guys have, we show a historic detail from that company that shows how they were able to use wood molding on the frame of these panels. Now the panels would act similar to what our panels do today. Of course, different materials they used, animal wool and fire retardant canvas over it. But needless to say, that's just shows that this has been undertaken in the past, and it is a need that the spaces have just out of the geometry of the rooms.
Unlike those days gone by, I don't think we'll have to put any bales of hay in there.
Yeah. Asbestos helps, canvas not burn, but we found out some bad things about that.
Anything committee, any comments or thoughts about the house, chamber and gallery? Questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if this has been brought up and I'm just not recalling the answer, but were there any security concerns with the proposed drapes in the back or removing the glass and replacing that with the brass railing? good
Yeah.
folks at Highway Patrol have any concerns?
So I think there were two things to note on that. The glass railing, I don't believe had any security concerns. It don't serve that much of a security function. The railing that we would propose would meet all of the necessary requirements for railings to be installed to prevent falling and what else? The security concern at the behind the bar area, I think, is one thing that you were touching on. That one, so the drapes there would be able to be employed when needed. So they would be rail mounted to be pulled open in times that visibility is wanted, desired. But they would remain closed if acoustics in that area become an issue. Whenever we presented that initially, we had talked about that kind of serves two purposes. It serves an audio purpose as well as visual. So audially, it is absorbing sound coming from that behind the bar space and vice versa coming from the chamber out into the hallways. But visually, it also it gives a barrier to the chamber and then behind the bar space where you feel disconnected and hopefully will not talk as loud. And John, this is something that you had.
Well, there had been some comments on seeing people on camera back there talking and being kind of distracting to the Zoom calls, the feed to the internet. So you could shut those curtains and not see them.
And it was our understanding, and you, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was not a security issue. It wasn't like it was ballistic glass or anything like that. It was primarily an audio control component or voice.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Sherwood, it was actually debated quite a bit during the capital restoration project, and the glass itself doesn't provide any fall protection. It actually, if you leaned into it too hard, you would fall. The thought behind it was it provides maybe perhaps a little bit of protection if there have been instances in other states where people have had something and they've wanted to dump it in the chambers, but you could still reach over and do that even with the existing glass. And then behind the bar area is during session controlled by the sergeant at arms and the doorman.
So I've got, just to jump in with a couple of thoughts, that area that we're talking about, one of my favorite areas in the Capitol. I think it's, what's the word I'm looking for? I just think it's really impactful when you come through that first door and into that area we're talking about. So I guess I'm gonna have to see where we would propose these draperies. Because I really like the fact that you can see through and into the chamber, and closing that off in any way gives me a little bit of pause. So, and maybe I'm the only one, I don't.
Well, and we did look at methodology that you could pull it open and keep it open all the time and only close it when you absolutely have to. Because we were standing there trying to look at a rail system or a rod system where the curtains would pull to and how to cinch them at the end. Again, that'll all be developed in the design phase, but we did take that into account because we do believe that is the entry is important.
Yeah, it's pretty impactful when you walk through the door, so. Okay, anything else, committee? Please proceed, gentlemen.
Next is the Senate Chamber and Gallery. So here, very similar to the house, similar spaces, somewhat different, and we do have a slightly different approach with the drapery here. So due to the architecture of this room, the arches overhead provide a good area for the drapery to serve as absorption, but it also helps with the sight lines of the sound traveling towards the gallery. So in the house, we use the ceiling space of the gallery to provide absorption up there. That's what's preventing sound to come back down to the chamber. Now in the Senate, we have the opportunity to use a slightly less impactful option being the drapery. And here in this rendering, you can see what it may look like where drapery is mounted behind the arch. And as you can see in this perspective here, you don't have a sight line to that ceiling behind there. So what that does is the drapery absorbs any sound traveling up there to prevent it to hit that ceiling and reverberate up there, bounce back, reflect. So this is one of the spaces where we had considered the options. This is definitely a recommendation, but if the draper weren't installed, this is one of those ones where the ceiling should then be utilized for absorption. We believe this is the most prudent option. It's gonna be the least invasive. It's just gonna be, again, a railing with the drapery hung from it, mounted behind that on the face of the wall in a way that isn't destructive to the architecture of the building, but it does serve a crucial purpose of blocking those sound waves and help preventing additional reverberation in the gallery space. Not to get too distracted with that, here we also can see the different wall and ceiling options. So we have rendered in the ceiling options and wall options in every case in this. And I hope you agree with me that it's not too outstanding, if you will. It's not gonna stick out too much. What we've done here in our rendering design is we showed the frame of the wall panel as a complementary color selected elsewhere from this room, but the material, the absorptive material, is shown as the base color of the wall. Now, all this to show is that we have different options. Again, when looking at the House, the JAC, and the Senate, we haven't detailed this out yet. We'll be working with you on how we want to look at the edge conditions, how we want to look at, potentially stenciling here. As opposed to the House, we include a little bit more of a decorative stenciling option taken from the motif of the coffers in this case.
I do have a question, Mr. Chairman. So the proposed draperies have a substantial and effective impact on the gallery. What about the people sitting up there trying to listen? Do they take away from there?
Yeah, so
Able to hear what's going on? Cause it
One-
seems like it hits the draper, hit the draperies and stop, and those people up there maybe struggle to hear more.
So in the gallery, and this is kind of one of the issues that we've heard about and have kind of provided some discussion on in our previous reports, but the gallery does have an issue with intelligibility. And a lot of that's due to the loudspeakers up there. They ended up being spaced probably too far apart to actually cover all the gallery seats. So that's one of the items that we're talking about doing here, is getting the loudspeakers, probably adding a few more and repositioning them to be adequately spaced so that the gallery gets sound system coverage. Because you're really relying on the sound system in order to understand what's being talked about. You're not understanding people talking from down below. So the curtains, and the curtains will help with that, because adding absorption up there to the gallery will make the sound system more intelligible from the speakers. So.
Anything, committee? Okay, please proceed, gentlemen.
Next is the ceremonial conference room. This is in the governor's suite. The option we've chosen to proceed with here as our recommendation is just the ceiling treatment. In the past, we had included a rendering showing potential wall panels that would be able to blend in with the surrounding wall surface. But in this room, again, the ceiling treatment was able to suffice alone. And with that not impacting the walls, seemed to be the most prudent option here. So here again, you have a graph showing the recommended, and with ceiling treatment, it performs greater than our recommended value, which is, it's not a bad thing, it's actually a good thing. So alone, the ceiling treatment here is our recommendation.
I think the coil fan on that is one of the noisiest ones.
It is, yes. And so that is again, maybe this is part of the discussion, but the major maintenance funding. Here, this estimated cost, I believe, it includes this room's major maintenance item. It hasn't been separated out in this estimated cost. So something to think about here is that this may potentially be lower for the ceiling treatment option. But it does, in this case, include that replicable solution we've identified as a major maintenance item.
So in reference to that, we've got the two panel cooling units in there. Does major maintenance go beyond that? Is there something that I'm not remembering in that room that?
They would be addressed in major maintenance.
Yeah, that is our understanding at least.
Anything else, committee? Okay, please proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you. Next, we have the executive conference room. This again is another ceiling treatment only option or recommendation, as well as all the incidental building system modifications that would happen after to accommodate that treatment. And the estimated cost again is about 120,000, a little over that. And again, with all these spaces, it's gonna be including that major maintenance item that would be able to be subtracted from this if it were pursued as a budget item with that bucket of money. Just further analysis showing that the ceiling treatment, while it performed almost as well as the wall treatment, this is one of the ones where it's basically a one-to-one choice where you're making, do I want to impact the wall? Do I want to impact the ceiling? And in this case, wall was used for picture frames, artwork, and everything else that would actually detract from the treatment. So this is assuming that the wall treatment is unimposed. It has the entire area for absorption, where the ceiling, you wouldn't hang anything necessarily. So it achieves its acoustic value without impact from anything that would be added on after the fact.
So Wendy, how do you envision this? I mean, obviously the governor's office would be the governor's sole determination on when and how to do it, if they want to do it. So how soon do we bring your office in to, as we do these evaluations, so that we're in sync? And with the chambers, I think it's the same thing. Essentially, that would be a management council call and the respective bodies call on their individual chambers to some degree. And so at some point, obviously we need to give them a presentation. And so what we do is make a recommendation to those entities. Is that what you envision?
Wendy, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Nicholas, that's generally the case via your recommendation authority is to State Building Commission and to Management Council. And so then I think in those presentations, then anything that would be in governor's space would then, their staff would work with Trainer, as well as your subcommittee as you develop the design recommendations. The design recommendations would still be through this subcommittee, but working in conjunction with any affected entity. Same with Management Council, when the information is presented to Management Council, specific solutions in the House versus the Senate, there may be, maybe council will be in agreement with whatever your recommendations are, but certainly Speaker and President have some input into that as well. But I'd say the home for the bulk of the design work, who Trainer will report to, is this subcommittee, and then your recommendations from that work up to SBC and Management Council, and then back down to those respective elected officials.
So, Wendy, I think the representative is right. Part of our consideration today under the workshop category on the agenda is to begin to think about timing, right? That's part of what we should be up to as a subcommittee, is kind of mapping out, where do we get there? So we may want to establish, for example, a time frame, knowing that we've got to get the design completed
to fall within when we've got to get this work done. If our desire is to get it done, you know, before next winter, for example, we'd have to start putting that on a calendar and hitting the right marks in order to get there. Does that make sense? And is that kind of in your mind, what's one of the things we need to consider today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think that would be a next step for Trainer, and I'm gonna turn to them and to Brandon because I think where we're at with the contract for Trainer now is Brandon's waiting to hear what you want done next. So whether Trainer's designing the full scope of this package or certain parts of this package, that Brandon would then release them to the next design phase for your scope of work. And then you would want to recommend that scope of work to SBC and Management Council, similar to what you did before session of putting them on notice as required by statute for architectural changes. You said to them, we'll come back to you and let you know what we're going to do. But right now, it just may be the notification to SBC and Management Council is we'd like them to design everything or 10% of the rooms, or, you know, whatever you come up with today will trigger state construction department's contract, and it should trigger your notification to SBC and Management Council that you're continuing with design.
Chairman, does that resonate?
It does, no, it does. Betsy, do you have any strong feelings or initial impressions about these recommendations so far for the governor's areas?
I think all this is great. I mean, we need it horribly, especially in the executive conference room. I mean, he's in there probably 75 to 90% of every day, meeting with people. My only thing is I'm just trying to think about, obviously any type of the public space, ceremonial conference room and stuff from the executive branch perspective. I see ESBC's role, but I don't know. I'm just thinking about the particular office space, the governor's office space. Does that have to go through SBC is what I'm trying to think about and would have to look into. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, somewhat ungracefully, and Wendy will correct me here. Technically, I think, you know, there's legislation that said this committee shall do this with this money. We have approached it, I think, probably more cautiously than what the statute requires. Again, to Representative Nicholas's point, of course, we will go to Management Council and make sure they're okay with what we're doing. But I think that's a great question, whether SBC has to opine on space that SBC does not. Because I mean, that's fair. No one's really in there except the governor.
And Mr. Chairman Auditor, it may be that's what statute says, and all of these expenses have to be approved by the SBC, and if that's what it says, that's what it says. This is one thing I just thinking in my head, the difference between the public space and then the individual office space. And I mean, and I appreciate you mentioning all the offices. I didn't have to talk to the AG's office about, but I think every single, and I bet you in your staff, every single office, the mechanical aspect of those fans is, I mean, it's a lot.
And I think I can help here a little bit because there's actually kind of two different issues going on. One is the money that's been appropriated to State Construction Department for this project. And the language is just that you as a committee will oversee that work. So that's a little bit different than your exhibit and wayfinding charge, which says you make recommendations to the State Building Commission and Management Council. The distinction here is anything that will use major maintenance money, that does not trigger, that's not an architectural change to the building. Hopefully, Henderson. When they're all done, you wouldn't see what happened. The portion of statute that triggers the notification and involvement of management council and SBC is that 9-5-106 E or F. I can't remember right offhand right now. And that is the provision that any architectural change to the building. And it's kind of to protect so that somebody doesn't go out and say, hey, it'd be great if we added a wall here. We could put 2 offices and kind of undo the work of this restoration project. So it's a little bit complicated. And to Betsy's point, I think we do need to dig in a little bit more about what's required, but any fan coil modification, that's just work that right now GSD, they're in the building doing, there's lots of trades work at all times. It's really finish changes. And if you were to add a wall to a room, those are where they're trying to have these governance bodies say, hold up, let's think this through.
Yeah, I think the co-chairman and Wendy expressed that very well. Good points though, Betsy. Thanks for bringing that up. I think I would sort of always lean toward the caution side on what we're up to. And I really like how this subcommittee is operated. And I hope that both the branches of government feel that way. We've really, I think, made good recommendations, but we've been careful to make sure that we're going up through both channels. And hopefully we can continue that. I think whatever we do on this acoustic front, I think we're going to find that we will be limited. So our recommendation has to be to utilize what resources we have to the maximum. We can do that, in my opinion. I'd probably lean the committee toward taking care of the most important rooms that have been sort of outlined today, for example, thus far, rather than trying to do everything and spreading our resources out throughout the building in some areas that maybe don't get the high traffic or maybe aren't utilized quite as much, for example. So I think a little later this morning, that's kind of what we need to be up to give these gentlemen, their next charge. We can talk about that. So, okay. Any further thoughts on that? Please proceed, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can go back to that slide that we had the full list as well as the estimated total for everything. Well, we just have a couple more spaces we'll touch on here this morning to show that's individual estimated cost. So another room is the policy conference room. This is another ceiling treatment only option recommendation. And this is again going to have the incidentals that every other room with the ceiling has had so far. I can go through these ones a little bit faster since they're getting repetitive. But again, graph shows that the ceiling treatment was the most prudent and thus the recommended option. The governor's formal office.
Sorry, could we pause? Betsy, is the policy conference room the one on the garden level? Okay, great. I didn't know what it was called. Okay.
Sorry, Madam Chair.
No problem.
Thanks for asking the question.
And then the governor's formal office is an area that we had actually identified as preferring to include wall treatment as opposed to the ceiling. This will need to be potentially re-examined and moving forward with our details, and it may make more sense to instead do the ceiling option. But as you can see here, again, it was something that they were working very similar in their improvement to the space. Maybe something here to note as well is how high that existing calculation was. And I think maybe what I've heard this morning is that that is anecdotally true, that the spaces do not function acoustically quite well. So here you can see the blue and green being the green, the recommended, the blue being right on it, and the orange being beyond what's recommended. And perhaps in this case, it was a balancing budget consideration that was made. But ceiling may again be examined for this room moving forward.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, please.
In that room, the wall treatment space you've outlined, at least half of that has TV screens on it, two TV screens. I mean, I just didn't wonder if that means the wall treatment is not as effective.
Yep. This may have just been a quick decision that was made that didn't examine that. Initially, this room actually was not considered in the report. And so it was an after the fact calculation that we were able to make to then inform our recommendation. So we were going off of limited data, and in moving forward, we will increase the amount of data that we consider in this room.
And Mr. Chairman, just so you note historically and for future use, this room was the governor's conference room, and the conference room was his office. And within a week of moving in, he flipped the two rooms. He found that the office was too ostentatious. And so he flipped it, but I could see where another governor might want to flip that back and make this room the conference room and the other room his or her office. But that is why there's two TV screens in there, is because it was thought to be a conference room. So I just felt like if you're putting that wall treatment with the TVs, I don't know that.
I think the answer is the ceiling makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it does to me. I mean, that's exactly what I was gonna say. There's some pretty important business goes on in all of these governors' areas, so it just makes sense to me if we're doing ceiling, and then in here we just do walls. That didn't make any sense.
Mr. Chairman, I might also add, in addition to major maintenance changes not being architectural, my understanding from Trainer is these ceiling treatments also have no architectural impact. So it may be that in several of these executive branch space rooms, it is truly only a ceiling treatment, and there wouldn't be the concept that you have changed the building when it's done.
We would have to vet that out. We'd have to go in and do another site visit and verify what's there.
Well, and again, we gave the architectural changes notification, right? So we have, I mean, granted, we're not gonna go wild, but I mean, we did meet that bar, right? Okay.
We told people what we were gonna do.
And then it might include sticking stuff to walls and or ceilings.
That's right. So, gentlemen, please keep going.
Sure. So the last three spaces we're gonna be looking at are primarily in the corridor spaces of the Capitol and then the extinction. These are the House and Senate lobbies, of which we have recommended installing area rugs in each of these spaces. It will minimally impact of course, your tile that you have, and they're very decorative, very, very beautiful tile. But we can design it in a way that contributes to the space as opposed to taking away from what that tile brings to it.
How much do the rugs help in those spaces?
The rugs, since there's essentially no absorption there now, they do provide some benefit. We talked about these kind of corridor areas. I think early on, we had looked at, the full ceiling plaster treatment, and it was kind of already identified that these are less critical, and we wanted to just pare back to something kind of minimal and inexpensive, and so the rugs were kind of the path that we were proceeding down.
You could go the green shag on one end and then the orange shag on the other.
Yeah, color coded.
Shag is better.
Yeah, the thicker the better. 3-inch pile, I think. Yeah.
Shag is much more absorbing, right?
Yes, definitely.
Gonna throw that out.
Mr.
Anything for
Chairman,
the,
I would point out that you did remove carpet from these spaces to expose the tile, however, so that's not to keep in mind.
Mr. Chairman,
or approach?
I don't remember how we clean these, how the custodians clean them, if we've got what kind of mechanical devices we have, if we have something that's wide enough, that's like a writing type thing, we may actually have to change equipment if we have something that's too big. I don't think we use the same thing that we do down here, but I don't remember if it's the width of that, we would have to possibly change how we clean them.
You just run a wire over the steamboat, hang them over that and hose them off a little bit.
Yeah, I meant the tile around it, because I think we have equipment to clean just
I thought
the
you
whole
were talking
tile
about the
room.
rugs, you know, and getting those cleaned.
Yeah, we have vacuums, we do have that, so we're covered on the fronts.
All right. Sorry, we said.
And I just have a question relates to when we were talking about furniture and putting rugs down. I was told it's just a liability from a tripping hazard. Is there particular rugs that you don't have to worry about that particular liability?
Yeah, we've already addressed ADA. We know that there'll be tripping issues, so whatever we recommend will be a low profile, it'll have a transition. It'll be color, it'll actually be an accent. We don't want it to blend with your marble, so we'll be looking at all of that. And try to get something that's also non-slip.
That's a good question. Anything else? Those are fairly important areas. More important, I think, that people sometimes realize there's a lot of communication goes on right there. So
We talked about dress shoes, the noise, the vibrations, the noise transfer just from shoes walking around out there, so it'll help.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, could we just have maybe have him do an estimate of what the ceiling would be on that? It's probably going to be the most effective and I think you are going to have some long-term maintenance with those rugs that you necessarily wouldn't have on the ceilings, and you're going to have replacement costs probably every 10 years or something. So, you know, just be interested to see what the cost would be on ceilings. And I think the same thing about the drapes. You're going to have a maintenance cost on those drapes and replacement costs on those. So if we're looking at, you know, a long-term fix, we should, you know, I guess these are a good cheap way to get something, but you know, in the long term, you know, 50 years from now, you know, I guess you look at it in that vein to a certain extent.
Treasurer Meyer, good points made. Gentlemen, if you could take that under advisement and would be interested in that, I think. Any further thoughts on lobbies? Okay, please proceed.
Next is the monumental corridor. So these are areas that have already been kind of established as conversational areas. They have the couches and other furniture items here. And what we're proposing here is just to increase the amount of absorption and include an area of rug underneath those conversational areas. Another thing here we have included on this slide is also the mobile sound system for events held in the monumental corridors, and in the future slide you'll see for the extension corridor as well.
So, yeah, to kind of remind what was in some of our reports earlier, these areas are used for ad hoc events, and the current sound systems that have been used have been reportedly inadequate. So we've provided a recommendation for a still a portable sound system that is more geared towards spaces like this that are more reverberant, so they provide a better performance than the speaker systems that you utilize today. And I think we've recommended, you know, depending on the size of the event, you know, 2 to 4 to 6 loudspeakers, depending on how many levels of the rotunda get used for those events. And those can also be either shared or used in the Capitol Extension corridor for events that happen down there that would work well in that environment.
So is that something that we can have a demonstration? We bring up the system, or the manufacturer bring up a system and we test it?
Yeah, that could be done.
To me, that makes the most sense.
Yep, or you could even, instead of purchasing it, you could do a rental system and have it used for an event and test it out before you commit to purchasing it yourselves.
Thank you, gentlemen. Keep going.
And last is the Capitol Extension corridor. So this is an area, again, with the portable sound system, but here we have also recommended installing wall treatment within the skylights vertical surfaces. So that just increases the amount of absorption in the space. It's a pretty hard corridor without much absorption apart from the furniture that is there. So a little bit more absorption provided in the skylights would help benefit that space and reduce the reverberation.
And so just for clarification, that's up in the actual recessed area going up into the skylight.
Right.
Yeah, so it'd just be on the walls, like the vertical walls inside those coffers.
What's the benefit? What's the reduction in?
So this was also kind of another area where it was kind of added on a little later. We don't have sort of measurement values, I guess, in this area. It definitely would reduce the reverberation time. It is also probably kind of a minimal impact, kind of similar to if you did maybe rugs in this area instead. Kind of something that we can do to decrease reverberation time without much impact. This corridor does have acoustical ceiling tiles in it already, which greatly help, and it, you know, compared to some of the corridors in the Capitol building, it's already performing better. But the ceiling area is somewhat limited because the skylights provide big chunks of area that's reflective and not absorptive. So we're kind of just trying to, if we can, get it up to a little bit better performance.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, to Treasurer Meyer's point, the ceiling does give an opportunity for a more longevity product that isn't gonna be subject to wear and tear like rugs would be. That would potentially be replaced in the future, act as dripping hazards, although we will be detailing out to follow the ADA guidelines. The ceiling does remain to be a spot where it's out of sight, out of mind, while still providing the absorption.
Yeah, looking at one of our good friends on the subcommittee, I think long-term maintenance, that was a good point made by the treasurer and has been made all the way through that we've got to pay attention to those kind of things. So appreciate it. What else? Please proceed.
Well, that brings us to the end of the slide. So if you guys want to go back, I can head back to the initial slide where we brought out each room and the total estimated cost. So here, what I think we need to establish is the important rooms that we are going to prioritize in this scope moving forward. So after hearing out each one of these spaces considerations that we've made and have outlined in the comprehensive report, what I believe is crucial today is beginning to look and prioritize the spaces that the public business occurs in and any other space that we deem as necessary in this initial scope.
So committee, I'm inclined to take about a 10-minute break since we've gotten to the end of these slides. Gives us an opportunity to think about that, but I think that's exactly right, that we should come back and maybe go into the workshop portion of what we indicated on the agenda. And we'll do that in about 10 minutes. Let's take a 10-minute break. All right, committee, let's come back to order and get things started. Brandon, I'm kind of looking your direction. And I thought maybe you and Wendy might have some thoughts about the best outcomes out of a workshop this morning. Can you give us a little prelude to what would be helpful to you? Maybe start with you, Brandon.
Sure, I think really our next phase moving forward is with the team understanding what the scope is that they're looking at, so that they can then put pricing to that, and we can get a proposal from them that we could continue with their contract and pushing it forward. So really defining what that scope is, and the scope might be larger than what the appetite is for what we're doing, but really kind of defining what it is we want them to start to design and move forward with and look at as we go forward. And if we can pare that down, that's great for us and the team. It defines their scope a little bit better and allows us to focus, but I don't believe or know that we're fully at that point right now. So I think right now our scope's probably a little bigger than what the appetite might be as we go forward, as we understand better designing further.
Appreciate those thoughts. Wendy, can you give us your thoughts? I just want to make sure, as chairman, I want to make sure that our subcommittee does the work necessary to get us out of here with some good directives and have the right outcomes of a little workshop for the rest of the morning. Can you help us with that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think at this point, trainers presented all of the information and it's a matter of turning it to you for discussion. I think they do give good cautions about, if you only do drapery in a room and you decided to do that across all rooms, the whole reason that this was brought up and funded was because you have problems in all of these spaces. And so I think just being mindful that Trainer and Henderson and Avant are here to, guide you on what they do have really good science behind what will happen as you implement different concepts. And I would just echo Brandon, that we're at a point where without direction, Trainer really can't proceed. And it may be that they design further the full scope and then you decide if you want to cut back or if there are certain rooms that you want to focus on. That will certainly be your prerogative. I think an easy one is just to take that whole bucket of major maintenance. And if you as a committee gave that direction to state construction department, they can start working on their end with how it works for triggering major maintenance approvals and funding, and start working with Henderson and Trainer just on that scope of work. And then as you work through these decisions today for the other spaces, you can also give additional direction for design for those solutions.
So thank you, Wendy. I appreciate that. Let's talk about the major maintenance piece, because I think we can maybe carve that off right away this morning. It seems to me that we've got a pretty good idea, at least with the package that was presented this morning. I don't know about the rest of the building. There's probably a whole bunch of those cooling canisters that we haven't included in this, Brandon, but it seems to me like we've got a pretty good cost estimate on the priority areas that we've talked about this morning. Is that, am I looking at that correctly?
On the major maintenance portion,
Yeah.
is that what you're referring to? Mr. Chairman, I believe we've got a good understanding of what that is and budget of what that would take to push that forward.
So committee, and I don't know if Treasurer Meyer's still with us, but Madam Chairman, I think I sure feel comfortable with what's been recommended this morning. It seems to me that major maintenance piece, that would be a great approach to get going on that and give the green light. Chairman Nicholas, any thoughts that you have, or? Rest of the committee?
No, I would agree that I think the fan coils and the addressing the heating cooling system is the easiest thing to do. And we've been trying to do it for years now. And so this is just the next step of what we've been doing. I do think that once we need to know if the work that's gonna be done has a benefit. So I think we have to schedule it in kind of in some of the important rooms and see if it works. And then make the call if we're gonna do it in every office and do a walkthrough on every office. But, and that's kind of my approach to everything we talked about today is we don't want to jump off the bridge. We want to see what works and then expand upon that as we move forward.
Thank you for that. Treasurer Meyer, talk to me about the major maintenance piece. Any thoughts you have?
Well, I think we need to, if we got maintenance, and it's required and the department's looked at it and suggested that needs to happen, I think we don't want to delay that. That's just common sense. We've had a lot of times in the last 20, 30 years where we delayed something and it just cost us more later. From my perspective on that we should, move forward on the recommendations based on the department's analysis. The one thing that, after major maintenance, there's another issue, I guess.
Okay, we'll come back to that. So,
Mr. Chairman, and
go ahead, Brad.
I think one thing we would want to do and we'd want to get with the design team is to actually mock up as has been suggested and test what that result is to even on that major maintenance component instead of, wholesaling and going forward. I think we'd want to take a look at it too and see what kind of improvements we get. And I think that might help this body feel a little more comfortable about what we're doing and how we're pushing forward on that major maintenance component.
Mr. Chairman, I might also add that a bulk of that was the fan coil unit issue, but were also the issues that they called miscellaneous major maintenance. And some of those we actually have already had success using major maintenance monies to address. I'm going to be embarrassed to say how ductwork and velocity of air, and so that's some of those solutions as well. So luckily we do already have a track record with what state construction's been able to do to modify some other areas.
And we haven't been able to get it perfect, but we've been able to reduce some of that noise quite a bit. Again, it hasn't been perfect, and those are case by case. But I think just on these individual case units that I think it'd be a benefit to take a look and see what it gets us. And we've been told through the science that we should have some good success with that.
Well, that hits right where Representative Nicholas alluded to, and I think the idea to just get started, see how it's going, but I'm not sure if we need a motion for that subcommittee, or if we're just kind of in agreement that we give approval for major maintenance to move forward. And maybe report back to us on the initial project or two that how it's working. If it's gonna work, then go full speed ahead and let's get some work done. So I'm not sure how to approach, Wendy, I'm looking at you for help on what sort of, do we need a motion, you think? Or
Mr. Chairman, I think if you'd like to make a motion, you sure could, but if the direction and consensus of the subcommittee is to proceed, I think with the appropriation to state construction department and your subcommittee advising them is the way that protocol is set up.
As
So
I
I think
read
it's
the
up to
committee,
you
you are
guys.
going advised.
I think it'd be beneficial to have a motion just to, I guess, understand these are almost two different scopes that are happening.
Mr. Chairman, I will make a motion to proceed with the utilization of major maintenance funding to address some of our acoustic issues. And look forward to an update on testing a few of these out and sharing those results with us.
Moved and seconded. Wendy, Rihanna, do we have what we need on that motion?
Mr. Chairman, I believe so. I would just add that the numbers that Trainer is showing now, again, don't also pull out the other major maintenance issues in space. So that dollar amount that you saw today will likely change, and as other spaces are added.
Okay, Treasurer Meyer, anything to add on that? Are you comfortable with the motion?
I think I'm comfortable with it because it's the construction department's gonna make those decisions and I think they'll move at a pace that would you know, I think reflect both my goals and I think Representative Nicholas's goals is that you know, they'll you know, make sure that if they're going to continue spending major maintenance dollars, they don't do so foolishly. I got every confidence in the department.
Yep. That sounds good. Brandon, I think we've got good directives there for you.
Yes, sir.
Let's, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
I,
All right.
Any opposed, no? Okay, that motion passes.
So Brandon, I do have a question.
Go ahead.
And obviously, what would be nice is as this proceeds, is to develop some internal expertise so that as we do repairs, as we do replacements, we know how to do it ourselves, or that somebody at least is spearheading and has to just do for our self-help for this capital. And I know that if there's always been questions on whether or not we've got sufficient custodial work here and maintenance ground crews in terms of caring for this building, but we've addressed that in a couple of different ways. And if we need more, then I think you just gotta let us know so that we can work down that road as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative, we were kind of having a discussion before on this trial, and I think it'd be interesting to see what kind of time it takes to get into one of these cabinets and actually change this out as we're planning this moving forward. And I think we could definitely look to ANI and GSD to supplement that and help us. And I think that'll help inform both this project and inform the maintenance staff moving forward of what's required. So thank you for this suggestion.
Brandon, it seems like maybe as an addendum to the motion that whenever you have the opportunity to get a look at one of the cabinets and get it repaired, get to report back to this group and let us know how that goes. And obviously we want to make sure that's going to be worthwhile. And if we discover that it is, and then we're going to want to make sure that we give approval full steam ahead. Hope that makes sense, but maybe there's a way we can reflect that in what our recommendation is too.
Absolutely. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's going to help inform the rest of the acoustics and everything else. So once we kind of do this mock-up to go in and actually put the science back to it and be able to report back to this committee, I think will be very beneficial.
Okay, appreciate that. Yeah, thank you, gentlemen. That'll be good. Anything else on major maintenance? Okay, let's move on to this whole idea of how far and how fast and the best way for our committee to give you some directive, gentlemen. I guess one thing that I'm comfortable with, committee, and I would appreciate any thoughts you would have. We've identified the critical spaces in my mind. Obviously, when we're talking about major maintenance, we want to go right on down the hall, and we've got a lot of offices that are going to need our help, whatever. But when it comes to this next conversation, it seems to me like there's no need to really talk going beyond what was presented this morning. Does that make sense? I mean, we've identified that what to me would be the critical areas in the capital that we've heard about and that we know have difficulties from an acoustical standpoint. So is that as far as we want to go? Do we want to add to this package that's been presented to us? Do we want to pare the package down? Do we want to divide it into three things, for example, or whatever? Anyway, Madam Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. I think one of the questions we needed to ponder today was, do we want to try to spread money out as wide as possible over all the rooms? And the sense I'm getting is, no, we do not want to do that. We know we have these, 8 to 10 super high priority spaces. We all spend time in them. We know they're awful, and need sort of hard hit. And I don't think we need to go beyond the areas that were presented today. And I think the recommendations made were a super good starting point for us to, if anything, I might take one or two off the bottom of the list, but I think it's a really good starting point to work through those and see how we feel.
Representative Nicholas.
So my thought is that that we do a couple rooms and see if the ceiling tile works. Because if it doesn't work, then we're gonna have to go to a plan B. And the only way we can know that is have it installed. And if you look at the rooms, the easiest ones to do would be, and we could do one executive room if they want to do it, but we could do one of the conference rooms, or two of them. And just see, we could do like the policy conference room or the executive conference room, one of them, just to have it done, see what it does, and so we don't do too much damage, just in case we don't like it, or if, all we see is the drafts of where it ought to be, but we need to know what it sounds like once we do it. And frankly, at this point, I would not touch the House and the Senate until we've seen what's happened. And that's gonna be a bigger process anyway, and more of a walkthrough. I think as a practical matter, the draperies and the rugs, they're, it's less than 5% of the sound, and I think what we really want to do is try the ceiling tile, indoor wall tile in those locations, and pick the rooms and just, and as it's going along, we'll have the ability to say, yeah, this is great, continue, let's go to this room. But if we have the workup and the costs and the contractors lined up, plus we could get it started immediately, as soon as we put it all together and actually have a finished product that we can look and examine by the end of September, October. That would be nice.
So what are the thoughts, committee, on this tier 1, tier 2? We could even put it into 3 tiers, but the tier 1 approach of Representative Nicholas makes a lot of sense to me. 2 or 3 rooms. The only question in my mind would be, does it drive cost? In other words, we're standing all of this up to do 1 or 2 rooms and then standing it all down. And gentlemen, I'm looking your direction. How do we test something like that? Let's say we do the governor's office, is it anecdotal only, or is there a way to find out if we've done some good?
So yes, we could, I think, a good example, I was gonna bring this up, is the meeting rooms, public meeting rooms. We have already sort of a example of public meeting rooms that work better in the capital extension corridor because they have acoustical treatments on the ceiling. So starting off the bat, we kind of have an example of something that works well, and the public meeting rooms that are in the Capitol that don't work as well. And the difference is measurable when we've measured that. The reverberation time in those rooms is widely different. And we've calculated using the science what installing new acoustical treatments will do in these public meeting rooms to basically make them like the ones at the Capitol Extension. So you kind of have some perception and anecdotal evidence of how that will perform. And we can back that up with the testing. What is the difference in reverberation time and what is the speech intelligibility improvements on the sound system? Obviously you could do that at the mock-up in the public meeting room to test it. We do kind of have a benchmark already for what is going on in the extension meeting rooms for consideration. But
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Treasurer Meyer.
Yeah, as I recall, in one of the slides that went by, that if we get going on this, we'd save around $300,000 if we did it, and rather than do it in piecemeal. And I would think that we could probably send the whole committee to some place that's already had this treatment for 30,000. You know, but I don't think that's necessary that we need to take a trip to Kansas or Minneapolis or wherever they've had this treatment. So if we have angst that we don't want to move forward with this, then that we want to see what it actually does. I would assume that there's some place where this has already occurred, and if people want to take a trip there, I would think that that's something that we could probably find in our travel budgets, and maybe the auditor and the other legislative representatives would take a trip, find out for themselves whether or not it's something that we want to move forward with. Because if you can save $300,000 in the implementation of it, then I'm wondering why we would leave that on the table if you could actually get comfortable with traveling to a representative installation. And we may find out that you go to that spot and you don't want to spend a nickel, or you may say, yeah, let's just go ahead and move forward with it. But I think there's a way to find out whether or not we're spending our money wisely, and for a lot less than $300,000 that we'd lose if we did a staggered implementation. So I guess I'd leave it with that, and find out from our experts here whether there's a spot or some place where we could travel and actually get that on the ground feeling of representation about what we could expect if we had an installation in Wyoming.
Yeah,
Thank you, Treasurer. Go ahead.
sorry, to answer your question, Colorado would probably be your best capital to look at. Their Senate and House chamber both did the exact same product on the walls and ceiling. So they would probably, we'd have to visit with them, find out if there's other rooms, if they did committee rooms, did they do anything else? But the pictures we presented was proof that it could be done and could be concealed and could be applied in a historic area. So
Yeah, do a road trip, Mr. Chairman, co-chairmans.
Yeah, I mean, I've been down and toured that, and it's, we could all go down there just on our own. It's not that big of a deal, but I'm curious about it. And their House and Senate are much, much larger than ours. So it's a different kind of comparison. But and also then obviously our two conference rooms got a lot higher ceilings than we do down here or in this time. And so I don't think there are fair comparisons, but we need to see the product. So if they have this product down in Colorado, just to go see it and look how it's mapped and put on or someplace, I think that's a great idea for us to go look at it and do it.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that to Representative Nicholas' observation that it would be nice to actually have that scientific measurement of what Colorado's reverberation and any other measurements that we're looking at. And so then you have both our subjective listening ability and actually some scientific information that backs up that this is a road we need to travel.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman, I like Representative Nicholas's idea of say, maybe we don't spread it out one by one and but maybe we chunk it into a couple where that $300,000 maybe is a little bit less. If we do one test on several rooms and then say, wow, this is a big difference. We're gonna move on to the chambers. You know, almost like a two phase to sort of minimize those remobilization costs. My one comment on testing it out, I think going with one of the conference rooms in the governor's area is great. But I do think we have to, on any sort of like accurate picture for all of us, we have to get into one of those public meeting rooms at least. I mean, the governor's area, I understand is really, really bad, but most of us aren't in there and you don't have the public meeting aspect of it. So if we were gonna say, let's do 3 rooms, I feel like one of them has to be at least one of those 110 or 113 where we have real public meetings. We all know it's awful and we will have a real life test. I mean, I don't mind going down to see other, but until you're sitting in the chair trying to hear what's being said during an active committee meeting, it's really hard to really know much. I guess my biggest question, you know, say we said, okay, you know, the governor's executive conference room is horrific. Let's do ceiling treatment in there. We do 110 because we know it's horrific. Let's do ceiling treatment in there. I mean, the big question is, what are your thoughts on JAC? Because again, we know that is probably the worst of the worst in terms of our sound quality. We all have to go there. We all know it's bad. It's bad for the committee meeting, you know, members. Do we go ahead and do that one, knowing that it's got to be done in some way, shape, or form?
So with regards to GAC, the only reason I hesitate is because it's a taller room. And there are different components to it. And more particularly, there's the artistic components that it needs to really match the ceiling and tie all that in. So that might take a little longer to do, but we could probably put the paneling up and have this. Someone else can later come in and do that paint work, the artistic components to it. So I wouldn't have, I think the issue is which rooms do we do and how many? So I think all that's up for discussion.
Mr. Chairman. With regards to the comment about the executive space, you know, that would take, I think we're gonna need some coordinating and scheduling is, I think that might be somewhat of a challenge. So from the ceiling perspective, I kind of see other rooms going first to make sure we think they're beneficial and they work and they look right. I think more of the mechanical aspect would be something I would love to see, maybe 1 or 2 areas that are used very much to try it out. And if we see, once you've figured out the kinks and run through all the problems, I see that would be a great thing to try to coordinate with the executive conference room and the governor's office space earlier rather than later. That was just my thought in my head. I haven't actually talked to anybody else, but that's what I was thinking.
I want to come to the experts. It feels like our committee is leaning toward a tiered approach. Appreciate the treasurer reminding us that that's over $250,000 if you have to remobilize at some point. Is there a way that we could divide this up, gentlemen, to mitigate that extra cost a little bit? Or if we're gonna do 2 different installments, it's just gonna cost quite a bit more money.
Yeah, I think definitely breaking it up is, you've got remote costs, you got contracts, you got material costs, nobody can predict that. So if your first phase, you selected certain spaces and you hired us to design those in their entirety, because we're not gonna know the outcome unless we do everything. doing a mock-up, we still gotta design it, we still gotta figure out how to do it, so. The question is kind of from our perspective also is what are we being told to design in its entirety? Because it will take time, we'll do it mechanical, we'll do electrical, how we're gonna detail it, detail the edges. Would we do a phase one where we're hired to do only these 4 spaces in their entirety? And then do you come back and amend our contract to do the rest? I don't know if that's prudent. It definitely will cost you more because we'll have additional design costs back at the second half. It's typically what would happen is you would agree on the scope, we would design everything, and then you would provide a mock-up, but usually the mock-up is not based on the science, it's based on the aesthetics and is it acceptable the way it's installed. So, and I don't know if even selecting one room versus another is hard to do because every room has got different nuances, it's got different configurations, windows, no windows. So one room may work better than the other. There'll be perception involved. Obviously, John can do testing to see if we have, achieved that in that one specific room. But you mentioned too, the House and the Senate are extremely complicated spaces. It'd be difficult to mock up something that proves out that. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's
Well, it does. I don't have a lot of heartburn, committee. I totally get the approach that's been suggested. But I guess, knowing that we've got the difficulties that we do in these rooms and some of the spaces in the Capitol, it just feels like to me, it's time to go. I mean, it's time for us to go to work, but, we have experts here with us who have testified and shown us that these products work. They know that they work. They've worked in other places. We could fly and try to figure out from somebody, did it work for you? We could probably make a phone call and find that out. But I guess I'm trying to get my arms around whether or not we want to spend quite a few extra dollars to break this project up. Or if we can get comfortable with moving forward. I feel like I could get comfortable moving forward with this project and just saying, let's get going.
Mr. Chairman, I guess, is it sort of separate questions of breaking up the design to only design a couple of rooms versus going ahead and allowing design of the whole space, but then maybe breaking out the construction piece to try and expedite 1 or 2 rooms once that design has happened? I don't know if that saves any money or if that maybe is the design part breaking apart take more time, which delays more costs, more, inflation for construction later, or if that might be helpful.
Gentlemen?
both of those are valid options. You could break up our design phase. We'd work with Brandon, he'd tell us design these 4 spaces or all of them. Breaking up the construction too, you're gonna be dealing, in both cases, you're dealing with delays in the process of getting it done. Our estimator CCS has factored in inflation, maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years, knowing the complexity of this. So there is inflation calculated in that already. So.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Treasurer Mark.
I would guess that if you were going to break it up, I would break it up in a manner that you would just say we're going to get the entire design for all the treatments that's in this program, but in all those areas where the ceiling had the biggest bang for the buck, or maybe in all the areas, put the ceiling treatment in, because that's going to be a little bit type of a different mobilization and a little bit type of a different crew, perhaps, in working with ceilings rather than putting something on the wall. And I think the second mobilization of somebody that's just doing wall treatment is going to be a lot easier than coming in and trying to remobilize for a crew to put on a ceiling treatment. And and we might just see that, that the ceiling treatment might do enough that gets us where we want to be. I think there was only one graph that I saw where ceiling treatment wasn't that effective. That wall treatment, I think, was a little bit better. So, from my perspective, you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck if you just put in ceiling treatment everywhere. Your mobilization cost is probably going to be less on wall treatment if you go that. But the design, I think, once people get moving on the design, you might as well design toward the specs that we've seen in our areas there. From my perspective, I just do the ceiling treatment even in the galleries and stuff, and where we were going to have rugs. I'm not a big fan of the drapes. I don't know how much more that would cost, but you could probably do it all for maybe that 1.6 if we did it today, and get a more comprehensive product. But start with the ceilings, and I guess I'd ask the folks whether or not the actual crews that move in and do this, as far as equipment and stuff. Am I wrong that ceilings are a little bit harder to put up than walls? Or not?
Yeah, that's definitely true. Yes, you would have protection of material below you. You'd have scaffolding. You're dealing with a very typical drywall installation process. You're dealing with panels, applying them, screwing them. You do the whole framing first. You come back with panels. So you're moving from side to side of the entire space. So the ceiling will be more impactful. Plus, we have a lot of stuff on the ceiling.
Mr. Chairman, Treasurer, something I'll add to that too, though, is that this product was selected primarily because it could be used on both. So it may be the same contractor doing both the walls and ceiling. It's not necessarily going to be different contractors. So it's still the same mobilization, for instance, in a single room where it has both walls and ceilings.
Mr. Chairman.
Wendy? Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I kind of a follow-up question on that. With the mobilization for the ceilings, are we talking about moving all the furniture out?
Most likely, because if the contractor has to protect your furniture, they're gonna have pricing in, and we're gonna help guide that, especially if you've got historic components like a dais or something. We will help them try to figure out how to protect it, because they'll need fall protection. Just construction is a rough trade. So moving it out will make it more convenient. It'll probably reduce your construction cost, but you're gonna have your own cost to move that stuff out. So those are things that have to be weighed in every space. Typically, if you can give a contractor a complete clear space, it's gonna be quicker, more efficient. They're gonna get in, they're gonna get out. Timing's important to them too, just like it is to you guys. So anywhere you can make it easier, anywhere you can minimize telling them how to do it. Means and methods, that's what they do. We don't interfere with that process. So if we can, if you have a design, it's clearly in the documents, you let them go in. You let them know that obviously minimizing time in a space is critical. You give them a time frame. So for instance, the house chamber, you only want them to be in there a week, and you give them that time frame. They're gonna price it however they have to get out in a week. It may be 24-hour work to get it done. So anywhere you can minimize interference with them getting in and out is the best.
Okay. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, that'll definitely have to be a factor in coordination and identifying where we can put the different pieces of furniture as well. As you know, those desks are rather large, and there's only so many places we can stuff some of that in the cabinet.
Questioning.
And I don't remember the cost, but for instance, to do contractors to remove all the furniture from the extension, which has happened once or twice, is several $1,000s. To just even move that out of the way, when we've gotten quotes for that, to move that into like just the dock on the same level, that's quite a bit of money. So we'd want to coordinate and make sure we've looked into those costs as well.
Yeah, it's good caution.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think good information that I'm leaning toward agreeing with you that we probably should try just save the $250,000 or $300,000 and move forward. I think the science is there, and I think these folks are professionals. But it's it's entirely up to you guys. I hate leaving $250,000 on the table.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Brandon.
maybe to break this down a little bit more, I mean, a lot of what we're talking about is construction, making decisions with construction. But I think really is what we need is to understand what our design group's gonna do rolling forward. I think a lot of these decisions and discussions can be had once we have these documents in place. And it also gives us a guide into the future. If we only decide to do 2 rooms, we have a set of documents for everything all the way through. And that's all dependent on what the committee wants to do. But I think looking at it first from the design standpoint and then letting that design standpoint, those construction documents inform our decisions as we go forward into construction.
So that design piece, I'm getting some heads shaking up and down over here, so, good thoughts there. And Wendy, you had some thoughts that may have been in that same direction.
Yes, they're building off of what Brandon said, which is that obviously design needs to happen, whether it's 3 rooms or whether you eventually wanted to do 10 rooms. So trainer may also be able to give you some guidance on how long that design would take and what could be accomplished by, obviously in JAC, that room needs to be ready to roll in December. Chambers this year in a general session would need to be ready by January. So there may just by necessity need to be some phasing simply based on when those rooms have to be available. And so I wasn't sure if trainer can give a little guidance there as well as time to design a full package.
So that's one of, just to add on to what Wendy just said, gentlemen, my biggest concern through the whole thing, in my mind, as we've had this discussion, is what's our time frame? What are we looking at here? Because I think, at least from my standpoint, I was hopeful that by winter time, we could have a lot of this work done. Winter time is when all the activity takes place in the Capitol for the most part. But that means we've got to be done in October or November, maybe a little into December. But if you're talking the appropriations room, November, December, January, that's full. So yeah, just timing wise, can we complete design work and have any shot of this, guys?
We would have to, I guess if you were to hire us to do all scopes, we would have to sit and really pencil that in, working with Henderson, working with a bond. I assume you have a 1-month bid time, Brandon, that you have to put it out to bid for a month. This would be competitively bid. It wouldn't be a negotiated construction manager component. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to work back from your schedule when you want the work done, and we'd have to start applying the time of, and then we'd also have to take into account review documents. Do you want to see a 30% review of our design? Do you want to see a 60%, a 90%? Each one of those take time because then you would be reviewing it. And so how we review that is at our formal meeting. So again, everything's going to play in. It's going to take weeks of time. So we just need to work our way backwards to figure out, see if it's even possible. Obviously a smaller.
Why is it design? Go ahead.
Is it possible to do the kind of the rooms we talked about, do those to full design first? Provide those to us, and then you can go in, for example, I would say the last thing we would do would be the chambers. Because that's a political thing as well as that this committee is probably not going to decide. All we're going to do is make recommendations. And the respective chambers are going to kind of make those decisions. So, and if we had a room done, 1 or 2 rooms done, so they can come and look at it, that's going to have a lot to do with what their recommendation is going to be. So in other words, if there was ways we can stage the design as part of your ongoing contract. And then we might have the possibility of getting a couple contractors in here and getting something done by, if they could start in September or October. And if it only takes a month to do the 2 conference rooms and to do JAC, then that, that, to me, that makes the most sense.
Yeah, so we'd be phasing our design phases. We'd have like a phase one, do your stuff, but we would actually be producing a construction document. So we'd be working up bid documents, specifications, the drawings, the details, the front end, and that would be issued, Brandon, I assume is like a small package.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we get that done, we would then fall back and either do the rest and then create a second bid package. So it's phasing the overall process if you're trying to get work done this year
Right.
and those certain rooms.
So it feels like, I kind of like where this is going. It feels like committee, we would recommend full speed ahead on design with the idea that there's a tier in there. And we want to focus to be on about 3 rooms so that we have potential once that design is completed, that tier 1, we can move full speed ahead and maybe get some completion on those. All the while finishing up the design on the rest of the rooms that were presented. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I think there's an economy of scale that's happening here too. By creating that front end for a few rooms, there's a lot of time involved in that. It saves us later down the road. But that initial front end, while it's a couple rooms and maybe not as many sheets of design,
Doesn't save us that much.
well, no, it will, but at the same time, I don't know how much. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong. I mean,
You're right. There is.
Thinking, Brandon, that we go with the complete design package, no matter, push that hard, work as hard as we can to get some design in place and then talk about.
I feel if we have, Mr. Chairman, I feel if we have a complete design, it gives you guys a lot more leeway on how to break this thing up, and it gives you a lot more control on those bid packs down the road. Not that you wouldn't the other way, I feel it give you a bigger picture of what you're looking at.
And I would agree. I mean, once you have the bid package, you can then break it up with the contractor that you select. You could say, do these 3 rooms immediately. And then as you get into session, maybe you have some other rooms you might be able to attack that are, maybe one of the public committee rooms because it's not being used. You can kind of phase their construction or create phasing. Do these 2 this year, next year you start in the spring and you do these 4. You have a lot more power because you have one complete document and then the contractor knows the overall end scope. But you would have to be very clear how that's done.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I believe too that it would help us understand a cost picture too. I think it gives us a more holistic costing of everything. And allows us then again to start to partition and do a couple rooms or however it is we want to then break it up.
I appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
I've got a question, I guess, for Representative Nicholas, because it seemed like to me that there's an appropriation already. Was that appropriated to the Building Commission? Or where was that appropriation to? Because it sounded like that it's your opinion that the House and Senate are going to have to approve their own individual areas at a later date, that there isn't the authority to move on the House and Senate chambers. Is that correct?
Representative, go ahead, and then we'll go to Wendy to remind us of.
Well, I think there's lots of nuances to the issue. But from a political standpoint and a practical standpoint, if we had contractors going to start changing and designing in the chambers right now, it would be pandemonium, and that's the last thing we want to do. So I think as a practical matter, at a minimum, management council has to see the design, see the cost, and what it's going to look like, and they're going to want to see samples. So from a realistic standpoint, I think that's what's going to happen.
So I
Gotta love bureaucracy, don't you, boys and girls? Man. Yeah, but,
Oh,
so I guess we're gonna move forward on the total design so we know what we have. And then probably to Wendy's point, the necessity of being able to accomplish something will be borne out by the time schedule that necessarily exists. And I think that if you are going to do the big job of the chambers, you probably should do that, have everything, all the ducks in a row, and be able to have that mobilized, the contractor mobilized right after the sessions. So it sounds like this is going to be too big of a project perhaps to move forward. I just hope that as we move on this, if we do everything, we get the lower price if we're going to basically operate in the context that the contractor's going to know what he's going to bid against, and the design on everything, because you're doing it all at once, will give us some of the benefits of the difference between the 1.3 and the 1.6. And I would hope that those benefits would be forthcoming.
I think, Treasurer, that was in the form of a motion, was it not?
Yes, it was, Mr. Chairman.
Does somebody have a second for that?
Mr. Chairman, I'll second.
For discussion. So it has been seconded. So let's discuss this idea of moving forward on design. Go ahead.
So I like the discussion. I'm comfortable with moving forward on the whole package on design. And I think Representative Nicholas makes some, is wise in that. Technically, do we have to get stamped written approval? Maybe not. Would it be a train wreck if we just go forward and start sticking stuff to the walls of the chambers? Absolutely. So I think we can manage that, but showing, say, a 110 and 113 that have had this treatment work well, to show that off and give comfort is really helpful. Here's my comment, and I'm happy to have this opinion shot down. What is our whole package? My knee-jerk reaction this morning was the capital extension. I don't think we do anything with that. It feels like it's gonna be minimal. It's relatively high cost and a pain in the rear because it's the, up in the skylights. I just don't think that space is bad. And I also feel not real enthusiastic about the rugs and the lobbies and the corridors. It almost sounds like those are gonna be a pain to take care of, hard to clean the tiles. And Treasurer Meyer made some good points that if the lobbies are that bad and we find out the ceiling tiles work. So I would be inclined to almost knock those bottom three out and say the first, 8 that is our entire package. I would not die on this sword though, but especially the capital extension, I don't feel, when we have been talking about our high priority spaces, the ones we all know about that are really painful for all of us, that one to me just really hasn't come up.
Brandon, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman Auditor, I think pulling those out right now, I think leaving them in as part of the design, it is a solution. It is something that we can look at as an alternate, a bit alternate as we go forward. It's in the design, it's there. We know from the science what it does to the space. And as bidding that as an alternate, we can look at that and see if we want to buy that, if the value, taking in the consideration of maintenance, putting rugs down on or just tile floor, all those different things. But I think to close ourselves off to that right now with it being a solution to make that space better.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, where the corridors and the lobbies are just rugs,
Sure.
like it feels.
I get
You're
it.
not committing to a whole lot, so that feels okay. The other thing I'd say about the extension is we had no base. We have no data to even show that it's bad or good or terrible or okay. And so that's where I don't I don't see the point in paying for design on something that we didn't, and I'm not faulting Trainer, we didn't tell them to.
Right.
Because again, this has not been identified as a high need space. So it's not in the set.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, is that a concern of this committee that we would want to do that? We'd want to look at it at this point and have them do that confirmation as we move into construction documents. I mean, it's scope that's added, but it's something that can be done within this project.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's why I brought it up. It was a surprise to me that it was on here because I was like, oh, I didn't know that was a problematic space. So
Mr. Chairman, Madam Chairman, I tend to agree with you that these are areas of the building that is outside of the business of the building, and really lends nothing to how things are conducted in the House chambers or the meeting room. So it definitely is a low priority, but I don't mind if it was added to the design, but I don't like the rugs. I think there's problems there in maintenance and ADA and other areas, and that if they could just maybe give us an estimate of a ceiling treatment, but and to your point in the connector, yeah, there's not enough ceiling treatment space in there, I think, to make much difference. So it wouldn't give me any heartbreak if they weren't there, but if it didn't cost that much just to give us a materials estimate, it would be a spot that if at some point in the time, at least we'd know what the materials would be. But yeah, I agree with you more than I disagree with you, Auditor, in that proposition of taking those off.
Well, I appreciate Brandon, he make a recommendation that's compelling to me, which is, I don't know that those two or three at the bottom of the list are going to add to the plan very much, to the design cost. So I would probably lean toward, let's get the entire recommendation through the design phase, and then we can pair it up after that and go back to what I think is a good recommendation from Representative Nicholas, which is, at that point, we've got a design in front of us. That's when we can say, look, let's move. If we want to carve it up at that point, we can do a couple of rooms, have something that we can lean on and show. So I would, with respect to the motion on the floor, which is to move forward with the design, I guess I would be comfortable designing the whole thing. But I agree with the statements being made. A couple of those may want to fall off or be an addendum to a bid. Does that make sense? Any other thoughts on the motion? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that I don't know whether this is necessary, but if we're looking at it, we might ask to see, a list of what could be accomplished before October 15th. Because I say October 15th because if there's problems, it's going to run into November. I wouldn't want to say December because if there's problems, then it's running into the legislative session. So we maybe give a drop dead date of completion of a rooms, that will be done before October 15th.
I think that's a good recommendation too. Brandon?
And I think as part of that, another way of looking at it is pulling this mechanical portion out. I think we would have a pretty high success rate of accomplishing a good chunk of that prior to session. Without these guys sitting down and looking at schedules, it's gonna be really hard to say today that we can get X amount done prior to session. I don't feel confident in that. I feel confident in some of those mechanical solutions being accomplished prior to the
Appreciate that, man.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think that's what the design's going to tell us. That just what can be accomplished, but I don't know if October 15th is the right date, but maybe we'd say to placate the management council at a date determined by the management council. I'm fine with that. I think they can make that decision if they want to.
Yeah, I think that's as good a date as any, and I think that can be incorporated into our recommendations.
And taking the mechanical off, because we're going to be doing that in-house anyway, right? A lot of it, perhaps.
You still have a design.
It would still be, designed by our design team and we'll have to look at different solutions for that.
Okay.
So Wendy, bring us home on this, on the motion that's on the floor if you can, okay?
You bet, Mr. Chairman, and I would just add one more element that you might want to take up as a separate motion after this, which is mobile AV systems in the rotunda and the extension are different than acoustical treatment in those spaces. So that's something we can talk about after you're done with this motion, that we can actually proceed based on a specification and some testing either through rental or a loan. So maybe hold that thought, not as part of this motion, because it's not really a design issue, it's a specification issue. So your motion would be to complete full design and trainer factoring in on that design, what rooms could potentially be completed by October 15th, understanding there's a desire to see some of those rooms done before session, and then it would be a staged, design is full, but then bidding of those scopes would be staged based on when the areas can be complete and based on the subcommittee's evaluation of those spaces.
Does that make sense, committee?
So the only,
Representative.
just to add to that, then, but we're pulling out the extension. That's not part of the design.
I actually suggested that it should be part of the design.
Yeah, and I'm suggesting, I suggested it should not, so.
It's not an obstacle, but go ahead.
Then we've had multiple suggestions of not doing drapery and rugs. And I want to go back to the concept that the capital oversight committee over 3 or 4 years worked diligently to ensure there would never be rugs, because we wanted that floor to be part of the capital effect. You know, that checkerboard is, and that's why we put it in the extension. The idea that now we're coming up with rugs would be the antithesis of all that work that was done. And we also looked at drapery through those 3 or 4 years and came to the conclusion that, number one, there wasn't a lot of drapery in the Capitol early on. We don't have any samples of what it would look like, and to put stuff in would not be authentic, and it wouldn't be. And so we intentionally did not do draperies. And so if we do draperies, that's kind of a whole different issue, and I don't think that that falls into this in terms of just the acoustics component, because it's not big enough to. So I would suggest we leave the draperies out. So I just want to make sure we're tailoring it. In terms of the executive conference room in the garden level, do we need to do that one? I don't know if we have problems in that, or how often it's being used and what it's being used for. So I'm curious about that. Just so we can.
That's the policy conference room.
Yeah, whatever the heck it is.
Mr. Chairman, there have been affixed wall acoustical panels in that space to try to address the problems now.
Okay, subcommittee, what we need to,
Mr. Chairman, just to add one more detail there, I think I'd rather see the ceiling treatment in the governor's formal room there, because that's a lot more effective. And if you're going to do it right there, you might as well do it. And I think that's a small enough room that it could be done before the 15th.
I agree, Treasurer Meyer. Okay, Wendy.
Mr. Chairman,
Thought or two, and then we're gonna.
yeah, I think this will help kind of put a bow on this. Earlier in your discussions, you had mentioned the idea of requesting that trainer also look at the costing of doing ceiling treatment in the House and Senate lobbies. That would negate the need for rugs in those spaces. So if you wanted that designed.
I do think that's part of the motion. What we need to consider now is whether or not it's a friendly amendment, Treasurer Meyer, to take a few of these items off of the design as suggested by Representative Nicholas.
Yeah, I'm fine with getting rid of the rugs and the drapes and the connector at this point in time. I don't see that as a hindrance to the process. You know, I've had several conversations down there in the connector with people in it. It doesn't seem like there's so many people there that you can't hear yourself speak or communicate. So I think it's functional without that treatment on the skylights.
Okay, so the bringer of the motion is comfortable. Is the second comfortable with taking those items off of
I'm
the approval
comfortable.
for design?
And then just to be clear, we still have the House and Senate lobbies on our list, but it would be a ceiling treatment proposal as opposed to rugs.
Yes.
Committee, is everybody comfortable with where we stand on the motion now? Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Okay, that motion has passed.
Good work, Mr. Chairman.
Got you a little bit of charge, okay? So Wendy, thank you for the reminder that we do need to consider the mobile units, and we had that discussion, and maybe we come to you for exactly what that was again. What can we help with? We need probably another.
Do you have the presentation?
These are pieces of sound equipment, is that? Am I understanding that?
And while John's looking for his slide, Mr. Chairman, I can give you a little background on what's needed. This would be only used for special events in the rotunda, as well as special events in the extension, and surprisingly, there's more and more of those. And just the little sound system in the podium that we have now that GSD uses just really isn't powerful enough to reach up on. My understanding from John is these mobile speakers could be moved throughout different floors of the rotunda and are scalable based on the size of the event. And I believe we looked into whether they could also be used for outside events.
So John, we have some meetings scheduled going forward. Monthly, basically, with our subcommittee, so I like the idea of maybe being able to test one of these.
Okay.
Is that something that is doable?
Yeah, I think there's probably, then again, well, let me just re-summarize, I guess, what we have here up on screen that we found it. So this is a typical kind of modern portable sound system. It utilizes kind of a base unit that has the amplification and processing in it, and then there's kind of this column speaker on a pole. And this is one example. There's many manufacturers that make these. They're very good at beach intelligibility in reverberant spaces. So even in the rotunda especially, and also in the extension corridor, these would be really good at covering a crowd for these, special events. As Wendy pointed out, they can be, multiple units can be daisy chained together to create sort of larger systems. When we talk about it in the extension, that's probably just two of these, maybe flanking stage or podium. When you talk about the rotunda, you're probably putting one or two of these at every level to cover the corridors on either sides of the rotunda. So in terms of sort of a mock-up or a test, we could try to set up a demo where the manufacturer brings their product in and shows it off and what it can do. The other option is to, for your next event, instead of using the speakers you have on hand, you're renting a system that utilizes something like this and seeing if that performs better. And then knowing that you do these events enough that you may purchase those units for future and not rent every time because of economy. So I think those are probably the two routes you could take, or you could do both. You could get the manufacturer to come in and demo it and then go ahead and do a rental and see, how you like it.
Thank you for that. So,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
Treasurer Meyer.
I guess the only thing that I suggest is that we get better microphones, because I am tired of these like cheap microphones that have 2C batteries in them, and the batteries are always done, and you can never tell whether the things are on. And you've got to get it like within 3 inches of your mouth so you can actually speak. You know, I mean, let's try to get some studio quality microphones there if we could. That's just my pet peeve in public speaking with sound systems.
Treasurer Meyer, I think you hit a big nail on the head there. So committee, I think the idea that Wendy was sharing is that we could use a motion to maybe set up, but I want to ask Wendy, Rhiannon, you, and Brandon, what would work the best? I mean, what would you suggest to the committee to help make a decision as to whether or not we go forward on equipment like this?
And Mr. Chairman, I actually think turning to Andrew is the best here, because I would say probably a live event might be best, because the GSD grounds crew sets all that up. So involving his staff to see how easy it is to set up and how that all works would probably be really instrumental in its ability to do what that crew needs it to do over time.
Andy, didn't mean to overlook you on this too. Thank you for that, Wendy. So, yeah, what works the best? It's harder for us to come in as a subcommittee and set this all up in a rotunda, for example. Turn it on. Hey, it sounds great to us, and there's only 15 people in the rotunda. You know, I mean, it feels like to me it would come off better if we try some of this equipment at an event, right?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would make sense to use it in application. I don't know of any particular events that are coming up that would be inside the rotunda. Oftentimes it's used the most during session, bill signings, other kinds of conferences. We don't have a whole lot that goes on in the rotunda.
Is there anything
Outside
coming
of
up in the extension, Andy, that you could think of?
Mr. Chairman, I do know there's an event coming up in the rotunda in the end of June. So that might be an
Thanks, Kevin.
opportunity
Appreciate
to test something out.
Hey, Brianna?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, last Wednesday would have been perfect.
Could we set it up for last Wednesday?
Let's rewind the
You know,
clock.
times.
Extension, and we had events of the fallen soldiers, but we have potentially the unveiling of former Governor Matt Mead's portrait. I think, is it in the rotunda, Kevin?
Yeah, 27.
So that would be a good opportunity. I do want to stress, we do definitely want a good system, because there's a lot of these events. The inauguration, if you recall, was in the rotunda. We have We the People in the Capitol Extension. That's this long sound wave that's really hard to hear. There's a lot of events, outside rallies. So we do want something that works interior and exterior. But Corey with Construction Management Division does the permitting and then notifies her, so we can just send her a note if there's not something that's coming to mind, because she sends those out more on kind of a weekly basis. But I would think that event in June, if that's something we could get, would be a good opportunity to test at least interior rotunda listening.
So if we directed John, you and your group to come back to us with a recommendation and maybe work with the manufacturer of, is that how you would do that? Because ultimately we bid something like that out.
Yeah, I think what we would do is we want to talk a little bit more about the event, where are people gonna be located? Who's talking, like where, kind of the layout of what the event's gonna look like, and then probably write sort of a request for proposal, something that could be sent out to a rental company that then they could respond to with, how many loudspeakers are gonna need to be, how many microphones, what kind of microphones, and we could write up that summary to be sent out to those entities for pricing to come back.
So, and go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think our ground staff might be able to give some feedback as far as kind of what different ones we've had. We do have a variety though. I mean, for instance, the bill signings, it's one podium, one speaker kind of at a time, kind of directed to a certain sized audience. If we talk about the inauguration, that was professionally sound, done with multiple speakers everywhere because we had crowds sort of in all different directions on all three levels. The extension would be kind of another similar one where you could have something like a portrait unveiling will probably occur at one location with one small crowd there if we're dealing with a weed of people, or if we're dealing with some of these events where they've set up tables or things like that. Like I think the Department of Agriculture hosted one of multiple states where they did kind of a dinner thing. That would be probably you need speakers throughout the room. So picking exactly which ones we want to, we see enough of to buy something versus things that, you know, if we bought 8 of these speakers and you could chain them together, but if you had anything that was only a, you know, a single podium, you'd only ever want 2 so that you don't have sort of people hearing too much or delay from both sides. You know, I guess I don't know what that sweet spot is, but I think our grounds crew might be able to help a little bit with that from their experience in talking with you guys on it. We might be able to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure what.
I for one trust the professionals we have, including you, to make those kind of decisions. I think that our recommendation could be more of a 30,000-foot subcommittee saying we want to move forward on taking a look at these pieces of equipment and including them in part of what we forward as our big recommendation. We want better sound at these events. I totally agree with Treasurer Meyer. I think it's sound is the most important thing at a public event. So I think it's the sentiment of the subcommittee, is it not, that we want to move forward with this? Let's pinpoint the end of June. But thank you, Rihanna, for that. I think that's a great event that we could, let's get a look at something. And maybe that's staff working with John and crew to see if we can make sure we have good equipment there, and let's listen to it. Let's see if it works.
And we have a wayfinding meeting that day?
Or the day before.
The day before. Oh, the day before.
Oh, it's the day before.
We'll just make it a really long wayfinding.
So does that give enough direction? Please? Are we okay, Wendy? We okay, John? Okay.
Like
Me? I
everything,
think
John, there's no such thing as one size fits all around here.
And Mr. Chairman, I think that would include then basically for Avant to help us with requirements gathering from the GSD staff. And then if possible, to get a piece of equipment on loan by that event, or if not, we will work with Avant on what events are coming up.
Okay, super. Yeah, whatever it takes. I think you've got the backing of the subcommittee on this one. What else can we accomplish before we close out this morning's work? Take it away, Chairman.
Wendy, how do we address the broadcast studio?
Oh.
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
The broadcast studio portion.
Mr. Chairman, I think you could probably go ahead and make a motion to continue in design for the broadcast studio. That is a separate appropriation from 2023. And this subcommittee was once again given oversight over that project.
What was the dollar amount?
That appropriation is 1.5 million. It includes the broadcast studio, the art gallery, modifications out here outside of the auditorium, some shell space for a custodial break room, kind of some just little small, I shouldn't say small, some projects down here in the extension that need to be done.
So then would they just do the studio? And so my point is that we need to give them probably a cap so that because we can spend it all on the studio.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, it would be the same process where they would be released into design and then restart requirements gathering, which would also include coming back to you frequently as a subcommittee about, hey, are we on the right path? This one would also include requirements gathering from stakeholders such as broadcasters.
But it's only the studio, not the art component.
Mr. Chairman, I turn to Brandon for this, but my understanding is because the broadcast studio by very nature is an acoustics project, that it would be included under trainer scope, but I think the rest of the scope for art gallery and custodial break room is separate.
Correct.
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
Second.
By Representative Nicholas and Representative Sherwood seconded. Any discussion on that? Maybe all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. So that motion carries. Move forward on that, Jimmy. What else, gentlemen, can we do to be helpful? Or muddy the water further? Can we do that for you?
We will obviously do our best to get the contract and design. Do everything we can to try to meet a deadline.
We appreciate it, gentlemen. You got a good flavor of all the concerns and thoughts, and subcommittee just wants, to take advantage of your expertise and do the great work and hopefully see some results so that old guys like me can hear better.
We appreciate the opportunity.
Okay, all righty. Appreciate it. I think that gets us to the end of this morning's work subcommittee. I want to finish up with the opportunity for any public input. Is there anybody online who wants to weigh in on what we talked about this morning? Anybody, Tanner? Anybody within the room who wants to do any visiting? Okay, we'll close public comment. Committee, that finishes up our work for the morning. If we got anything finish up this morning, anything, Wendy? Okay, we are done for lunch. I think we could pick back up at 1 o'clock. Everyone.
I want to break the six. Just want to see if I can speed it up. 12:30.
Yeah, we sure could. Okay.
We need to head to Denver as soon as I can.
Okay, let's come back at 12:30. That gives us a chance to just go find a donut somewhere and come back. Yeah, there we go. 12:30, and then we'll get after it this afternoon.